No hyperspace signature register. No radar ping, no satellite delay, no whisper in any intelligence network stretching from Vauxhall Cross to the Vatican's deepest archive. There was only the sky over London tearing itself open like old parchment, a wound of blue-white lightning spilling across the clouds at midnight, and then the screaming. The rift did not announce itself with grace. It arrived the way all catastrophes arrive, sudden, indifferent, and far too large for the moment that contained it. Above the black ribbon of the Thames, the air folded inward, buckled, and split, and through that widening scar in reality came fire. Not the fire of bombs or dragons, but something stranger, burning alloy, shredded plating the color of dried blood and gunmetal, engines still screaming their death throes as they fell. A structure the size of a cathedral spire crashed into the river with a sound like the world itself cracking a rib, and the wave it threw up swallowed 2 pleasure boats and a length of embankment wall before the water even remembered how to be still again. This was the Transformers' War. It had followed its combatants across dimensions, the way blood follows a wound. For millions of years, by their own reckoning, which stretched further back than the whole of human civilization, the war between Autobot and Decepticon had burned through the void of 100 systems, chasing the last embers of a planet called Cybertron, chasing the myth of a device called the Allspark, chasing, in the end, only itself. It was a war so old it had outlived its own reasons, sustained now by momentum and hatred and the terrible gravity of unfinished business. Optimus Prime had led his Autobots through nebulae and dead worlds in pursuit of peace. Megatron had led the Decepticons through the same darkness in pursuit of conquest. Neither had imagined that the war's next battlefield would be a rain-slicked, gothic, blood-soaked city that had never once appeared on any Cybertronian star chart, because until an hour ago, this Earth, this England, existed in a dimension the war had never touched. A stray discharge from a damaged ground bridge, Cybertronian technology never designed to survive the violence it had just weathered, had torn a hole not through space, but between it. 2 universes brushed against each other like strangers on a crowded street, and for one catastrophic instant, the barrier gave. Autobot and Decepticon alike were dragged through mid-battle, their war unfinished, their momentum unbroken, spilling out onto a world that did not know the rules they played by. They did not know, yet, that this world had rules of its own. Older ones. Hungrier ones. Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingates, Hellsing was not a woman who tolerated being surprised in her own city. She stood at the tall windows of Hellsing Manor's east wing an hour after the tier had opened, cigar unlit between 2 fingers, watching helicopter searchlights carve pale trenches through the smoke rising off the Thames. The reports reaching her desk did not make sense, and Integra had built her entire adult life, inherited, really, along with the organization, the title, and the crushing weight of her family's centuries-old covenant with England's darkness, on the principle that things which did not make sense were usually the most dangerous things in the room. Giant machines, not aircraft, not tanks, not anything her analysts could classify. Something had crashed into the river and then, impossibly, stood up. Sir Walter Dornez, her butler and the organization's oldest and most lethal servant, appeared at her shoulder with the silent precision of a man who had been doing this for longer than most nations had existed. His white gloves were immaculate even now, at this hour, amid this chaos. The first response team has gone dark. No confirmation of casualties. No confirmation of anything, really. Anything on cause? Integra asked, though she suspected the answer. Whatever came through that rift is still active, mobile, and large, Sir Integra. Very large. She turned from the window. Somewhere beneath the manor, in a cell that was less a room than a monument to old promises kept, something old and terrible and bound by her family's blood was already awake, already aware, already amused by the disturbance in the city he had haunted for centuries. Integra did not need to consult him yet. She needed information first. Alucard was a weapon she deployed, not a partner she consulted. A distinction she guarded fiercely even now. Assemble a reconnaissance unit, she said. Full silver and blessed ordnance loadout, in case this is Millennium testing something new. And Walter, quietly, through the usual channels, I want eyes on whatever the Vatican's people are doing tonight. If London has just become interesting, Iscariot will already be circling. Walter's smile was thin as a blade's edge. As you say, Sir Integra. Down at the river, in the wreckage and the floodlights, the machines that would come to be called Autobots were already fighting for their lives against enemies who had followed them through the rift. Decepticon warriors whose optics burned crimson in the London dark, whose weapons carved smoking trenches through cobblestone streets untouched by war since the Blitz. Optimus Prime stood tallest among the wreckage, his frame scorched from the crossing, his optics scanning a skyline of church spires and glass towers that belonged to no world he recognized. Beside him, what remained of his strike team, Bumblebee, Ironhide, a handful of others separated and scattered by the violence of the crossing, fought to hold ground against Decepticons who had followed with equal ferocity. It was Bumblebee who first heard it, a sound beneath the gunfire, beneath the screech of servos and the roar of plasma cannon fire. A low, wet growl that did not belong to any engine, any weapon, any combatant he recognized. His scanners registered heat signatures that made no sense. Humanoid shapes moving too fast for organic tissue, vital signs that flickered and vanished and reappeared as though death itself were negotiable to them. A Hellsing patrol, for soldiers in tactical black, silver rounds chambered, moving with the grim professionalism of people who hunted monsters for a living, rounded the embankment wall and froze. They had been briefed to expect something unusual. Nothing had prepared them for 18 feet of transforming alloy locked in combat with something equally massive and considerably more hostile, both of them utterly indifferent to the two ghouls that had crawled up from the Thames mud during the chaos, drawn by blood and noised the way sharks are drawn by a wound in the water. The patrol leader, a grizzled veteran named Harkness, who had put down worse things than ghouls with his sidearm, raised his weapon toward Bumblebee, the nearest, largest, most obviously not human thing in his field of vision, and fired. The round sparked uselessly off armor, plating built to survive plasma fire. Bumblebee's optics swiveled down toward the soldier with something that, in a human face, might have been read as bewildered offense. He had crossed a war-torn cosmos, survived a rift between realities, and the first thing this world's inhabitants had done was shoot him. Then the ghoul lunged from the shadows behind Harkness, hollow-eyed, gray-skinned, jaw distended in a way no living human jaw should distend, and Bumblebee understood, in the half-second before he moved, that this world's dangers were not going to fit into any category his tactical databases had ever cataloged. He crushed the creature with the back of one massive hand, more reflex than decision, and the thing did not die so much as dissolve, ash and shadows scattering across wet cobblestones like something that had never truly been alive at all. Harkness stared up, first at the ghoul's remains, then at the machine that had just saved his life without being asked, without understanding why, without any framework for what saving a human life even meant in a war this old. What, Harkness said very quietly into his calm, in the name of God, is standing in front of me right now. Above them, the rift flickered once more against the storm clouds, a wound still healing, still leaking sparks of blue-white light into the London sky. And then it closed, sealing both armies inside a world that had never asked for either of them, and had monsters of its own that answered to nothing they understood. The Transformers' war had found a new battlefield. It had no idea, yet, that it had also found a new kind of enemy. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Harkness did not lower his weapon. Professional habit kept his silver-loaded sidearm trained on the golden-plated giant even as the machine's optics, twin blue lights, alien and unreadable, and yet somehow expressive in a way that unsettled him more than blank mechanism should, tracked down to meet his gaze. "Report your status," came a voice through Harkness's earpiece, Integra's tone cutting through the chaos with the clipped precision of a woman who had commanded worse nights than this one. "Harkness, report." "Sir, he swallowed. Behind Bumblebee, the wreckage of the battle stretched along the embankment. Scorched cobblestones, a smoking chassis the size of a delivery lorry, and in the distance, still audible over the helicopter rotors, the crash and shriek of ongoing combat between machines that dwarfed anything in the British Army's arsenal. Sir, I don't have words for what I'm looking at. There's more than one of them. They're fighting each other. A pause. Are they hostile to us? Harkness looked at the smear of ash where the ghoul had been, looked at the towering machine that had crushed a monster to protect a man who just shot it. One of them just saved my life, ma'am. I don't think that's the word I'd use. Optimus Prime had heard every word, though not through any earpiece. His audio receptors, tuned to filter 1,000 frequencies of battlefield chatter across 100 worlds, had learned long ago to parse human speech the moment his scanners registered organic sentience. He filed the soldier's words away, saved my life, and felt something old and familiar settle over him, a certainty he had carried since Cybertron first burned. Wherever there was war, there would also be the innocent caught beneath its wheels, and it was to them, always, that his purpose belonged. He knelt. 18 feet of ancient alloy folding down into something less overwhelming, an old and deliberate gesture of a warrior choosing not to loom. I am Optimus Prime, he said, his voice a resonant bass that seemed to come from everywhere at once, translated by processors that had cracked the linguistic code of this world's dominant language within seconds of the crossing. I do not know this world. I do not know your enemies, though I have just met one of them, and I do not think it was born of the war that followed me here. Harkness's weapon did not waver, but his eyes did. You are talking to me. I am asking for your patience, Optimus said. My people are at war. That war has followed us through a rift none of us intended to open, and it has landed in your city, among your people, and I am sorry for that more than you can know. But we did not come here to conquer. We came here because we had no choice, and now we must decide, together or apart, what comes next. Behind them, 3 streets over, the answer to that question arrived in the form of a Decepticon war cry and a plasma blast that turned a parked delivery van into a fireball. Megatron had crossed worse gauntlets than an unfamiliar dimension, and he was not a warlord given to sentiment about the manner of his arrival. What mattered was terrain, and terrain he was already calculating, even as his followers regrouped around him amid the wreckage of a stone bridge older than his own memory banks. Terrain here was rich with possibility. A world without Autobot reinforcement fleets. A world, his scanners informed him with growing interest, saturated with energy signatures his systems could not classify. Biological, and yet violently, impossibly powerful, clustering in patterns that suggested concentration, hierarchy, command structures already in place. Barricade, he said to the black-plated Decepticon crouched beside him, optics scanning the London skyline with the cold patience of a predator assessing new hunting grounds. Report on hostiles. Autobots regrouping near the river, Lord Megatron. And Barricade's engine growled, an uneasy sound. Something else. Organic. Fast. My scanners register heartbeats that stop and restart. Tissue decay patterns that reverse mid-scan. It does not compute. Megatron's optics narrowed. He had conquered worlds built on stranger physics than this. He was not afraid of what he did not understand. He intended to use it. Then we will learn, he said, before the Autobots do. This world does not know our war yet. That ignorance is an advantage. I intend to spend it wisely. 3 miles distant, in a sublevel of Hellsing Manor lined with old stone and older wards, something in the darkness laughed. Alucard had felt the rift open before Integra's analysts had finished their first report, felt it the way a spider feels a fly touch the very edge of its web, a disturbance in the fabric of a city he had haunted, protected, and terrorized in equal measure for centuries. He had not moved from his cell. He had not needed to. The scent of the crossing, ozone and scorched metal and something else, something vast and cold and mechanical, entirely unlike the blood-warm terror he usually hunted, had reached him regardless, curling through stone and iron like smoke finding a crack in a door. He sat in the dark, red eyes gleaming, and considered the strange new flavor that had entered his city's air. Machines that bleed sparks instead of blood, he thought, and something in his ancient, monstrous amusement stirred at the novelty of it. An army with no fear of death, because it has never truly understood what death means. How delicious. How very new. He had killed gods once. killed men who believed themselves gods, which was a more interesting and more common category. He had killed werewolves and vampires and things that predated both. In 400 years of service to the Hellsing family, boredom had been his only true enemy, the endless gray tedium between one delicious slaughter and the next. Something told him, some old, patient certainty coiled at the base of his ancient and monstrous mind, that boredom would not trouble him again for quite some time. Above him, in the Manor's war room, Integra was receiving Harkness's report with the flat, controlled fury of a woman whose city was burning and whose intelligence services had not seen it coming. Walter stood at her side, adjusting his spectacles, his expression unreadable. Two factions, Integra said slowly, fighting each other, not us. For now, Walter said. Harkness says one of them protected his men from a ghoul. That does not make it an ally, Sir Integra. It makes it a variable we have not yet measured. Integra crushed out her unlit cigar against the windowsill, a habit she indulged when she wished she could smoke and could not yet justify the delay. Outside, the glow of burning wreckage painted the underside of the clouds orange, and somewhere in that light, two ancient wars, one from the stars, one from the shadows of England's oldest sins, were about to discover each other. Get me everything we have on unconventional threat containment, she said, and wake the round table. If London is about to become a battlefield for something we don't understand, they'll want to pretend they had a say in what happens next. She paused, watching the fires. And Walter, find out if the Vatican already knows. Iscariot does not like surprises, and neither, God help me, do I. Far across the city, in a chapel that had not held an honest prayer in decades, a priest in a long coat and round glasses had already lowered his phone, a smile spreading slow and sharp across his face as he listened to a report that should have been impossible. Machines from beyond the stars, Father Alexander Anderson murmured to himself, testing the words the way a man tests a blade's edge, falling into a city already crawling with the Protestant witch's monsters and her master's blasphemies. He crossed himself, though there was little reverence left in the gesture, only relish. The Lord does have a sense of humor, doesn't he? He reached for his coat. Iscariot would want eyes on this before Hellsing claimed the whole affair for herself. And if the machines proved to be demons wearing steel, so much the better. He had blessed bayonets enough for whatever shape blasphemy chose to wear tonight. Back at the river, the fighting had not stopped so much as paused, both armies drawing back into the smoke to reassess a battlefield that made no tactical sense to either of them. Optimus Prime stood at the center of a ruined embankment, his striped team gathering at his flank, and looked out at a city of stone spires and electric light that did not know, yet, what it had just inherited. Report, he said quietly to Ironhide, who limped into formation with a scorched shoulder joint and the particular fury of a soldier who had lost ground he didn't understand the terrain of. How many did we lose in the crossing? 3 unaccounted for, Optimus. Ratchet's signal went dark somewhere south of here. RC separated. Last ping put her near what these humans call. Ironhide checked a translated data feed with visible distaste. Whitechapel. And the Decepticons? Megatron's alive. So's Barricade, Starscream, at least 2 others. They didn't come through clean either. Ironhide's optics tracked toward the goulash still smoking on the cobblestones, a residue his sensors could not fully classify. Optimus, whatever attacked that human patrol before we intervened. It wasn't Decepticon work. It wasn't anything I've got a designation for. Optimus looked toward the ash, toward the city beyond it, full of lights and spires, and a species he now bore some undefined responsibility toward, whether they wanted it or not. Then we are not the only war this world is fighting, he said. Which means before we decide who our enemies are here, Ironhide, we had better learn who else is already at war with the dark. Above them, unnoticed by either army, a helicopter bearing the Hellsing crest banked low over the river, its searchlights sweeping the wreckage, gathering the first true images of a war that had just crossed into a world already drowning in monsters of its own making. Integra Hellsing did not summon meetings. She convened tribunals. By the time the sun rose gray and reluctant over a London still smoking along its riverbanks, the war room beneath Hellsing Manor was full, Walter at her right hand as always, a rotating cast of intelligence officers feeding data onto the great table's glass surface. And on the encrypted feed at the head of the room, the pinched, self-important faces of 3 round table members who had clearly not slept and wanted everyone to know they were displeased about it. Sir Integra, Sir Islands, never a man to waste an opportunity to remind everyone of his title, leaned toward his camera with the practiced disapproval of a bureaucrat who had built a career on being disappointed by other people's competence. The press are calling it a meteor strike. We would very much like it to remain a meteor strike. Then I'd suggest the press stop looking at photographs of 18-foot robots exchanging cannon fire over Southwark Bridge, Integra said, without looking up from the tactical display. Because that is what actually happened, and no amount of managed messaging changes what 400 witnesses saw with their own eyes. Are they hostile? Asked another voice, Penwood, this time, whose fear came through even the compressed audio of the secure line. Integra considered the footage playing silently on the table's surface. Grainy helicopter thermal imaging showing 2 distinct clusters of machines. One engaged in active combat against the other, one of them, the golden-plated one, according to Harkness's report, visibly intervening to save a human patrol from a ghoul. Hostile to each other, she said. Their intentions toward us remain, as of this morning, unclear. Which is precisely the problem I intend to resolve. You mean to make contact? Islands did not phrase it as a question. It was an accusation dressed as one. I mean to determine whether London has acquired a new predator or a new asset, Integra said. And I do not intend to make that determination from behind a desk, gentlemen, while Millennium and Iscariot both circle a wound this fresh. If we hesitate, someone else claims the initiative. I would rather it be Hellsing. There was a silence on the line that told her the round table understood the shape of that argument even if they resented having it made to them. You have my reluctant blessing, Island said finally. Try not to lose London doing it. The feed cut. Integra exhaled, finally allowing herself the cigar she had denied herself all night, and turned to Walter. Options, she said. We could attempt containment, Walter offered, though his tone made clear he did not favor it. Surround the larger cluster, the one Harkness reports as defensive rather than aggressive, with conventional forces, and attempt negotiation from a position of controlled strength. Against something that shrugged off silver rounds without apparent effort? We'd lose the men and gain nothing but their contempt. Then diplomacy without the illusion of strength, Walter said. A small, unarmed delegation. A gesture of trust, calculated to invite trust in return. Integra's mouth curved, humorless. And if they simply crush the delegation the moment it's convenient, then we will have learned something important about them, Sir Integra, at a cost considerably smaller than a war. She studied the tactical display a moment longer. The golden machine's icon, motionless now near the embankment, flanked by 3 smaller signatures that had not moved from a defensive perimeter in 6 hours. Not the posture of predators. The posture, if she allowed herself the thought, of soldiers guarding a position they did not wish to abandon. Fine, she said. I'll go myself. Walter's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only visible sign of his concern. Sir Integra, if Hellsing sends a lieutenant, we signal caution. If Hellsing sends its head, we signal respect, and more importantly, we signal that we are not afraid. She stubbed out the cigar, already reaching for her coat. Ready the car, Walter, and bring Sarah's. If this goes poorly, I want at least one of us capable of surviving what comes next. The embankment by mid-morning had been quietly cordoned by Hellsing operatives working under cover of a fabricated gas leak evacuation, London's usual bureaucratic camouflage for catastrophe. Optimus Prime had not moved his position, had in fact spent the intervening hours doing something that would have surprised Integra had she known it, waiting deliberately for exactly the kind of contact she was now driving toward. He saw the black car long before it stopped, saw the woman who stepped from it, young by human standards he judged, though carrying herself with an authority that belonged to someone considerably older, flanked by a silver-haired man whose posture read, to Optimus's threat assessment protocols, as considerably more dangerous than his age suggested, and a smaller figure in a yellow and black uniform, whose bearing was tense in a way the others was not. He knelt again, as he had for Harkness, the same deliberate gesture of restraint. "You are the one they call Optimus Prime," Integra said. Not a question. She had done her homework in the hours since dawn, cross-referencing Harkness's report with whatever fragments of data her signals team had managed to intercept from the machine's own communications. "I am Sir Integra Hellsing. This is my organization's jurisdiction. I would like to know what you intend to do with it." "I intend," Optimus said, "to leave it as quickly as I am able, Sir Integra, if leaving is possible. My people did not choose this arrival, and I would not have chosen to bring our war into a world unprepared for it. But until we understand whether return is possible, I ask for the same courtesy I would extend in your position, patience, while we determine whether we are a danger to your people, or merely strangers in need of a way home." Integra studied him for a long moment. This vast machine, kneeling in the ruins of her city's embankment, speaking with a gravity she had not expected, and found herself, against instinct, inclined to credit. "And the ones you were fighting? The other machines." "Decepticons," Optimus said, and something in the resonance of the word carried old grief, as well as old fury. "Led by Megatron. Our war began on our own world, over resources you would not recognize and philosophies you would not easily translate. I will not pretend to you that it is finished, or that it will not touch your world further while we remain here." "That is refreshingly honest," Integra said. "Most guests who've just leveled half a city block try rather harder to reassure me." "I did not come to reassure you, Sir Integra. I came to be truthful with you, because I suspect a woman who commands a hunting organization for vampires does not respond well to comfortable lies." His optics flickered. An approximation, Integra realized with faint surprise, of something like respect. "Your soldier, Harkness." He described what attacked his patrol as something that should not exist. "I would ask, in turn, what manner of world I have brought my war into." Integra almost laughed. "Almost. One considerably stranger than yours, I suspect, Optimus Prime. Walk with me. If we are to decide whether you are guest or invader in my city, I think we had both better understand exactly what we're standing in the middle of." Behind her, unseen and unheard by any of them, a shape in a wide-brimmed hat and a coat the color of dried blood watched from the shadow of a bombed-out warehouse across the river, red eyes gleaming with an interest he had not felt in decades. A war that has never tasted true death, Alucard thought, savoring the strangeness of it, walking straight into the arms of a girl who has spent her whole life commanding things that have. "Oh, Integra, you always did know how to make a night interesting." He did not move to intervene. Not yet. There would be time enough, he suspected, for introductions of his own, and he found, turning the thought over with the slow relish of a predator surveying new territory, that he was rather looking forward to them. Integra led Optimus Prime not to Hellsing Manor's public wing, where visiting dignitaries were entertained with tea and careful eyes, but to the lower archive, a long stone room where the organization kept its true history, the evidence and artifacts of a century spent hunting things that did not appear in any official record. Walter walked ahead, opening iron doors with keys that predated the manor's electrical wiring. Sarah's Victoria trailed at the rear, her borrowed soldier's discipline fraying visibly every time she glanced sideways at the towering machine folding itself carefully through doorways built for human proportions. "I would ask you to understand," Integra said, gesturing to a wall of sealed case files, "that what I am about to show you is not public knowledge. Not to my own government, in most particulars. I am extending you a courtesy I extend to almost no one, Optimus Prime, and I expect it treated as such." "You have my word," Optimus said, and something in the gravity of the phrase, old, deliberate, weighted with the particular sincerity of a being who had made and kept promises across the ruin of an entire civilization, seemed to satisfy her more than any oath a human diplomat could have offered. She opened the first file. Photographs, decades old, of something with too many teeth and skin the color of old parchment. "Ghouls," she said. "The reanimated dead, created when a vampire feeds without a killing blow, leaving the victim caught between life and true death. Slow, stupid, dangerous in numbers. What attacked your soldier, my soldier, was one of these." Optimus's optics processed the images with a stillness that Integra had learned, in the hour since their first meeting, to recognize as the machine equivalent of grave attention. Reanimation, he said slowly. Without technological intervention, without programming, without technology of any kind that your instruments would recognize, Integra said. This world runs on more than physics, Optimus Prime. There is a force older than your Cybertronian energon, older than anything your scanners are built to measure. We call it, in the absence of anything more precise, the supernatural. Vampires. True vampires, not the ghouls they leave behind, but the originators. Beings who do not die by conventional means, who heal from wounds that would kill an army, who move faster than your optics can track and exist, in some fundamental sense, outside the rules your physics obeys. And you hunt them. I have inherited an organization built for exactly that purpose, Integra said. For over a century, Hellsing has stood as England's shield against the supernatural, vampires, ghouls, and worse. We are effective. We are also, I will be honest with you, badly outmatched by the worst of what exists in the shadows, and kept in check largely by the fact that most of our enemies prefer subtlety to open war. You said true vampires. Plural. Are there many? Integra's expression tightened, and for the first time since their meeting, Optimus registered something that might have been hesitation. One, in particular, who serves this organization. The rest, an organization called Millennium, Nazi war criminals who fled underground after the last World War and have spent decades perfecting vampirism as a weapon of mass slaughter. They are why I cannot simply welcome your war into my city with open arms, Optimus Prime. My resources are already stretched toward a conflict I have spent my entire adult life preparing for. I do not have the luxury of an additional one. Optimus was quiet for a long moment, processing not merely the information, but its weight, the particular exhaustion of a woman who had, Integra Hellsing's whole bearing suggested, spent her life carrying a war she had not chosen any more than his own crew had chosen this crossing. Then perhaps, he said, our arrival need not be an additional burden. Perhaps it can be assistance, if you would permit it. Integra's laugh was short and without much humor. You misunderstand me if you think that offer reassures me. An army with unknown loyalties offering to fight my war for me is not a comfort, Optimus Prime. It is a second variable in an equation that was already unstable. Then test us, Optimus said simply. Set us a task by which you may judge our worth, our intentions, and our discipline before you commit to trusting either. I would rather earn your confidence through action than demand it through words. It was, Integra reflected, exactly the kind of offer she would have made in his position, and precisely the kind of offer that made her trust him fractionally more rather than less. She was still considering her answer when the archive's heavy iron door groaned open without anyone having touched it from the outside, and the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees in the space of a heartbeat. How very touching, said a voice from the shadows beyond the door, low, amused, dripping with a particular relish of something ancient enjoying itself. The soldier from the stars, offering his sword to the huntress of monsters. Should I applaud, Integra, or simply wait to see whose blood spills first? Sarah's went rigid. Walter's hand moved, with practiced, unhurried calm, toward the sword cane he carried at all times. Only Integra remained unmoved, though her jaw tightened with the particular weariness of someone long accustomed to an employee whose entrances never once respected propriety. Alucard, she said, I did not summon you. You rarely do, master. And yet here I find myself drawn by curiosity, which you know very well I cannot resist. A shape peeled itself from the darkness beyond the doorframe. Tall, impossibly tall, red coat trailing like something alive, wide-brimmed hat throwing a shadow across features that seemed, in the archive's dim light, to shift and reform with every step, never quite the same face twice. Crimson eyes, bright as fresh wounds, fixed on Optimus Prime with an intensity that made even the ancient warrior's combat processors flag an unfamiliar spike in threat assessment. You are the thing that has been walking through my city all night, Alucard said, circling Optimus slowly, examining him the way a butcher examines a carcass, assessing weight, structure, the precise location of vulnerabilities, metal and spark and something almost like a soul. If a soul can be built from wire and purpose instead of blood and sin. How curious. How very, very curious. I am Optimus Prime, Optimus said, holding his ground, optics tracking the vampires, circling with the wary precision of a soldier who recognized, without needing to be told, that he had just encountered something categorically different from anything his scanners had prepared him for. And you are? I am the thing your scanners cannot classify, Alucard said, and his smile stretched, slow and terrible, revealing teeth that had never once needed to eat for survival. The monster that serves the monster hunter. The reason Integra sleeps, soundly despite the horrors beneath her floorboards. I have killed werewolves, Optimus Prime. I have killed Nazi supermen and false messiahs and things that called themselves gods and were wrong about it. I confess I have never killed a star. I find myself wondering what that would taste like. The threat was not subtle. It was not meant to be. Integra opened her mouth to intervene. This was precisely the kind of provocation she had not authorized. Precisely the kind of unpredictable variable Alucard represented even on his best behavior. But Optimus spoke first, his voice even, unhurried, carrying the particular calm of a being who had faced down considerably larger threats than one vampire's curiosity. I have fought monsters across 100 worlds, he said. I have lost brothers to them, and I have buried enemies who thought themselves gods, and found, each time, that the universe does not reward arrogance with survival. If you intend violence, I will meet it. But I would rather you understood, before that becomes necessary, that I did not come to this world to be measured against its monsters. I came because I had no other choice, and I would prefer to leave it better than I found it, if such a thing is possible. Alucard went still. Something in his crimson eyes shifted. Not fear. Optimus was certain a being like this did not experience fear, but something closer to genuine, unexpected interest. He means it, Alucard said, turning to Integra with something almost like delight. How refreshing. Most things that come into my city either lie beautifully or die badly. This one may simply be honest, Master. I confess I do not know what to do with that. You do nothing with it, Integra said sharply, except stand down, unless I instruct otherwise. Alucard's grin did not fade, but he stepped back, folding his impossible height into a mocking half-bow. As you say, Master. Though I would ask, when you send your steel soldier out to prove himself against whatever crawls out of the Thames next, do send word. I find I am curious to see how metal handles teeth. He dissolved back into shadow the way he had come, leaving the archives several degrees warmer and considerably more unsettled than before his arrival. Integra exhaled slowly, and when she looked back at Optimus Prime, something in her expression had shifted. Wary respect, perhaps, or simply the recognition of a fellow soldier who had just passed a test she had not entirely planned to set. That, she said, was Alucard, the vampire who serves this organization, and the single most dangerous thing in this city, myself very much included. If he is curious about you rather than hostile, Optimus Prime, you have survived your first true test in this world. I would not recommend a second so soon. Understood, Optimus said. Then tell me what task you would set us, Sir Integra. I would rather earn my place in this city than simply occupy it uninvited. Integra considered him for a long moment, the archive's dim light throwing long shadows across the sealed files of a century's worth of England's secret war, and made, finally, a decision she suspected she would spend considerable time reconsidering. Millennium, she said. The Nazi vampire remnant I mentioned. We have long suspected they are preparing something. A resurgence, an offensive. We do not know the shape of it yet, only that it is coming. If you wish to prove your worth to this city, Optimus Prime, help me find out what that shape is before it finds us first. Night fell over London for the second time since the rift, and the city wore its wounds badly, cordoned streets, official cover stories thinning by the hour, journalists circling the embankment cordon like gulls scenting a wreck. Beneath it all, in the manor's lower levels, Alucard had not stopped thinking about the machine that had refused to flinch from him. It troubled him, in the specific way that only true novelty troubled a creature who had outlived novelty itself centuries ago. He had killed things that called themselves eternal. He had killed things that believed, with perfect sincerity, that they could not die. Optimus Prime had done neither. The Autobot leader had simply stood his ground, unafraid not because he believed himself invincible, but because, and this was the detail that gnawed at Alucard like a splinter of bone caught between teeth, he had accepted, calmly, the possibility of his own destruction as the price of holding a principle. Alucard had met very few things in 4 centuries capable of that particular flavor of courage. He found he wanted to taste it properly before deciding what it was worth. He found Bumblebee first, not by accident. The scout had been posted at the embankment perimeter, half on watch, half simply absorbing the strange architecture of a city that predated his own species' concept of history by a considerable margin. When the temperature around him dropped, and a shape unfolded from a shadow that had, a moment before, contained nothing at all. Bumblebee's weapon systems, primed before conscious thought caught up, plasma cannon rotating up from his forearm, with a whine of charging capacitors. Alucard regarded the gesture with the mild, indulgent amusement of an adult watching a child brandish a stick. "Peace, little one," Alucard said, though his grin suggested peace was the furthest thing from his intentions. "I have not come to fight you. I have come to look. Your leader interests me, but he is guarded, careful, diplomatic, dull qualities in a soldier, however useful they are in a commander. You, I suspect, are more honest." Bumblebee's optics narrowed, weapon still raised, vocal processors clicking through fragments of radio broadcast he had scavenged from the city's airwaves in the hours since the crossing. His voice, damaged in some old battle Alucard would never know the story of, assembled itself from other voices, other words, borrowed and repurposed into meaning. "Who?" His speakers crackled, stitching the syllable from a news broadcast. "Are you?" "I am the thing your leader's honesty impressed," Alucard said. "And I am curious whether that honesty runs all the way through your ranks, or whether it was simply a diplomat's performance for Integra's benefit." He circled slowly, crimson eyes tracing the scout's frame with proprietary interest. "Tell me, small one, in your war have you killed?" The question landed harder than Alucard likely intended, and Bumblebee's weapon arm lowered fractionally, some old grief surfacing behind the mechanical stillness of his optics. His vocalizer clicked through several false starts before settling on fragments assembled with obvious effort. "Yes," the cobbled-together voice said. "Enemies. Not choice. War." "Ah." Alucard's smile did not fade, but something in it shifted. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred exhaustion. "Not choice. War. I have heard those words in 1,000 mouths across 400 years, little one, always offered as absolution, and I have never once found them to actually absolve anything. But I did not come to judge you for your war. I came to see whether you regretted it." Bumblebee's optics dimmed briefly, the mechanical equivalent, perhaps, of a long exhale. His voice fragmented, searching, time. Alucard laughed, a short, genuine sound, stripped for once of its usual theater. "Then you are more interesting than your leader gave me credit for, little one. Machines that grieve their kills. I did not expect that when I came looking for novelty tonight, and yet here it is, offered up without ceremony." He straightened, tipping his hat in a mockery of courtly manners that somehow, in the moment, read as genuine respect rather than mockery at all. "Tell Optimus Prime that I find his soldiers more honest than his diplomacy. It may serve him better than he expects when Integra finally decides what to do with all of you." He dissolved back into shadow before Bumblebee could formulate a reply, leaving the young scout alone on the embankment with his weapon still half raised and a strange, unfamiliar sensation processing through his combat logic. Something between unease and the faint, cautious beginnings of respect for an enemy that had, technically, threatened nothing at all. Across the river, in a warehouse gutted decades ago by fire and never rebuilt, Megatron had spent the intervening hours doing what Megatron always did in unfamiliar territory: gathering information, testing boundaries, and calculating exactly how much chaos a given environment could absorb before it began working in his favor. The organic hierarchy calls itself Hellsing, Soundwave substitute, a smaller Decepticon named Frenzy, separated from his usual partner in the crossing and irritable about it. Reported, his voice a static lace screech. Old power, old money, old secrets. They hunt something called vampires. There's more, Lord Megatron. Signals I intercepted from a separate faction. Encrypted, military grade, originating from somewhere in mainland Europe. Chatter about something called Millennium. Something that calls itself the Last Battalion. Megatron's optics gleamed with the particular satisfaction of a strategist who had just located the fault line he intended to exploit. Tell me more. Old soldiers, Frenzy said. Human once. Enhanced somehow. The same energy signature as the vampire the Autobots encountered at the embankment, but organized. Disciplined. Building toward something. My intercepts suggest they've been dormant for decades, waiting. Waiting for what? Unclear, Lord Megatron. But the chatter increased sharply within an hour of our arrival. They know we're here. Megatron considered this for a long moment, his optics tracking across the ruined warehouse toward the city beyond, a city he had already concluded, ripe with the particular instability that had served him well across 100 conquered worlds. The Autobots would waste their crossing on diplomacy, on alliance building, on the tedious performance of principle that had crippled Optimus Prime's effectiveness since the day Megatron had first met him on the plains of Cybertron. That left the field open. An organization of enhanced soldiers, dormant for decades, now stirring the moment we arrived, Megatron said slowly, testing the shape of the opportunity. Soldiers who understand hierarchy, discipline, conquest, in ways this world's soft democracies never will. Barricade. Lord Megatron. Find their leadership. Do not attack. Do not announce yourself as a threat. Megatron's optics burned with the cold clarity of a warlord who had learned, across 1,000,000 years of failure and adaptation, that the best conquests were the ones an enemy invited in willingly. Find out what Millennium wants, and determine whether what they want and what I want might, for a time, run in the same direction. Every war I have fought, Barricade, has taught me the same lesson. The enemy of my enemy is rarely my friend, but he is very often my instrument, right up until the moment I no longer require him. Barricade's engine revved with anticipation, and if they refuse alliance, then we will have learned their strength before we're forced to test in battle, Megatron said. Go, quietly. I want to know everything about this last battalion before the Autobots even suspect it exists. As Barricade peeled away into the London dark, Megatron remained a moment longer amid the warehouse ruins, his optics tracking the distant glow of Hellsing Manor's lights across the river, and beyond it, unseen but sensed in the particular stillness of a predator's instinct, something ancient and monstrous that had, hours earlier, walked uninvited into an archive and left even Optimus Prime's scout unsettled. Interesting, Megatron thought, filing the sensation away with the same cold calculation he applied to every variable on a new battlefield. This world already has monsters of its own. Whether that makes it more dangerous or more useful to me remains, for now, an open question. But I have never yet found a monster I could not eventually bend to serve a greater purpose. This one, I suspect, will be no different. Above the city, the last light faded from a sky still faintly scarred with the residue of the rift that had brought two ancient wars crashing together. And in 3 separate strongholds across London and beyond, 3 very different powers had each, independently, begun making the same quiet calculation, that whatever came next, the side that moved first, and moved with the clearest understanding of the board, would be the side that survived it. Barricade found the last battalion before they found him, or so he believed, right up until the moment 3 shapes dropped from the rafters of the abandoned munitions depot he'd tracked their signal to, and he realized the hunt had run in the opposite direction the entire time. You are not native to this world, said the foremost of the 3, a broad-shouldered figure in a black SS pattern greatcoat that had not been fashionable or legal in most of Europe for 80 years. His voice carried an accent thick with old Germany, and his eyes, when Barricade's optics adjusted to the depot's gloom, glowed with the same faint crimson undertone the Decepticons' earlier scans had flagged as anomalous. We detected your arrival 2 nights ago. We have been waiting to see which of you would be curious enough to come looking first. You knew, Barricade said, optics narrowing, weapon systems priming without fully engaging, a display of readiness rather than aggression. Before Hellsing, before the Autobots even finished regrouping. The Major has been waiting a very long time for something interesting to happen in this dull, exhausted century, the officer said. He does not intend to let curiosity go untested. I am Captain Hans Gunsch of Millennium's Last Battalion. You may consider this an invitation rather than an ambush, though I confess we prepared for either outcome equally. Barricade's optics swept the depot, rafters, shadows, at least a dozen more heat signatures he had not detected on approach, all of them carrying the same faint anomalous energy reading his scanners, had flagged near the vampire that had accosted Bumblebee. Werewolves he would later learn to call them, though the term meant little to a processor built to catalog tank classes and weapons yields rather than folklore. Your Major wants to speak with my commander. My Major, Gunsch said, wants very much to know what a war between machines from beyond the stars might offer an organization that has spent 60 years perfecting the art of war beyond death. I suspect the interest runs in both directions, or you would not have come alone. Barricade considered the wisdom of continuing this conversation without Megatron present, weighed it against the tactical value of information gathered firsthand, and made the calculation Decepticons had made for 1,000,000 years across 100 conquered worlds. Information was currency, and currency spent wisely bought leverage. Talk, Barricade said. I will decide what my Lord Megatron hears of it. Gunsch's smile showed too many teeth to be entirely human, though whether that was vampirism or simply German dental work of a bygone era, Barricade scanners declined to specify. The Major, Gunsch said, intends to resume a war interrupted in 1945. 60 years of preparation, Decepticon. An army of vampiric soldiers immune to age, immune to conventional weapons, dedicated entirely to the proposition that war, true war, total war, war without the moral cowardice of restraint, is the only state in which a species discovers what it is truly capable of. He spread his hands, encompassing the depot, the city beyond it, the whole quiet conspiracy Millennium had nursed in the decades since its founders fled a burning Berlin. We lack only an opening move dramatic enough to draw England's attention fully, decisively, all at once. Your arrival, Decepticon, has done half our work for us already. London is distracted, frightened, uncertain what threat matters most. We intend to exploit that uncertainty. We wondered whether you might wish to exploit it with us. Megatron. When Barricade relayed the offer 3 hours later in the gutted warehouse that had become the Decepticons' provisional base, listened to the entire account without interruption. His optics tracking the flickering firelight of a burning oil drum with the patient stillness of a strategist, turning a new piece over in his processor. They want chaos, Megatron said finally. Chaos as cover for their own offensive. That is my assessment, Lord Megatron. And in exchange, they offer us what? Resources, Barricade said. Human infrastructure. Weapons manufacturing, communications networks, decades of dormant Nazi-era holdings scattered across the continent, banking, shipping, industrial capacity they've maintained in secret since the war. And soldiers, if we require organic auxiliaries. Vampiric infantry, immune to conventional destruction, expendable in a way even Decepticon drones are not. Starscream, who had been listening from the warehouse's shadowed edge with the particular calculation of a lieutenant already imagining betrayal, stepped forward. You cannot seriously be considering an alliance with organic fanatics, Lord Megatron. Their war means nothing to us. Their ideology is beneath consideration. Their ideology, Megatron said, with a flat, contemptuous patience he reserved for Starscream's predictable objections, is irrelevant to me. Precisely as the Autobot sentiment is irrelevant to me. What matters is capability. What matters is that an organization with 60 years of hidden infrastructure and an army immune to death by conventional means has just offered me access to both, in exchange for nothing more than my willingness to let their war and mine occupy the same battlefield. His optics gleamed. I did not conquer a dozen worlds by refusing useful instruments on the grounds of taste, Starscream. I conquered them by using whatever tool the moment offered. and discarding it the instant it ceased to serve me. And when this Major decides Decepticon weapons technology suits his purposes better than his own soldiers, Starscream pressed. When he decides to betray us the moment our usefulness runs out, then he will discover, Megatron said, and his voice dropped into something colder, something that had ended empires. Precisely why the Decepticon cause has outlasted every alliance that ever thought itself clever enough to use us as a tool rather than the reverse. He rose from where he had been surveying the map, servos grinding with the particular satisfaction of a warlord who had just found the exact leverage a new world required. Send word to Captain Gunch. Tell him the Decepticons are prepared to discuss terms. Terms, barricade, not alliance. I do not intend to fight this Major's war for him. I intend to let his chaos clear the ground for mine, and take whatever this world's Autobot sympathizers are too principled to seize for themselves. Miles away, in a chapel repurposed decades ago into something considerably less holy, the Major, a vast, grotesquely obese figure whose girth seemed to strain the very concept of vampiric physiology, his uniform straining at buttons that had not been let out in years, despite his condition never once threatening his health, received Gunch's report with the delighted, childlike glee of a man who had waited 60 years for exactly this kind of complication. Machines from the stars, the Major said, his laugh a wet, rolling thing that filled the chapel's ruined nave, fighting their own private war right in the middle of my opening move. Ha, 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 ha. Captain Gunch, do you understand what a gift this is? England will not know which fire to fight first. Hellsing will exhaust herself, deciding whether the greater threat wears steel or fangs. And by the time she chooses, our battalions will already be crossing the channel. The Decepticon leader has agreed to terms of convenience, Major, Gunch said. Not alliance. He was quite explicit about the distinction. Of course he was. Of course. The Major's bulk shook with continued mirth. A wise commander never trusts an ally he has not yet had the pleasure of betraying. Captain, I would think less of him if he offered anything else. No, this is perfect. Let the metal soldiers and the star-souled paladin chase each other across London's rooftops. Let Helsing's precious vampire hunt whichever monster catches his fancy first. While they are all busy admiring each other's teeth, my battalions will finish 60 years of patient preparation, and the war interrupted in 1945 will resume at last, bigger, Captain, grander, more total than anything that pale little century ever imagined possible. He turned toward the chapel's shattered stained glass, city lights glittering faintly through the broken saints and martyrs depicted there, and his smile stretched wide enough to show teeth that had tasted more blood than any battlefield in human history. Tell the Decepticon, Lord, I look forward to our cooperation, the Major said. And tell our own forces to begin final preparations. The opening act has already been staged for us, gentlemen. All that remains is the curtain. Optimus Prime had not survived 1,000,000 years of war by ignoring the particular silence that fell over a battlefield in the hours before something moved. He felt it now, standing at the embankment as dawn broke pale and cold over a London that had begun cautiously to resume the appearance of normalcy. Commuters crossing bridges that had burned 2 nights before, newspapers running carefully worded stories about unexplained industrial accidents, a city performing the elaborate collective denial that Integra Helsing's organization had clearly practiced for decades. Beneath that performance, Optimus could sense the same hell breath he had felt on a dozen worlds in the hour before an offensive. Ironhide, he said. Status on the perimeter. Quiet, Optimus. Too quiet if you're asking my opinion, which you generally are whether you say so or not. Ironhide's cannon arm flexed, an old soldier's habit of checking a weapon that did not need checking. Bumblebee's report troubles me more than the silence does, though. Bumblebee had relayed his encounter with Alucard within the hour of its occurrence, and Optimus had turned the account over in his processors more times than he cared to admit. A creature that could appear from nothing, vanish into shadow, and appraise a soldier's grief with the casual precision of a butcher weighing meat. Optimus had catalogued threats across 100 worlds, and none of them had ever unsettled him quite the way Alucard's brief, curious visitation had. He did not attack, Optimus said. That, I think, is the detail worth attending to. A being capable of what Bumblebee described could have ended the encounter in violence, and chose conversation instead. Curiosity today, Ironhide said, isn't the same as restraint tomorrow. I don't trust anything that finds a soldier's kills interesting. Optimus. That's not the reaction of something with a conscience. That's the reaction of something deciding whether we're worth the trouble of killing. Before Optimus could answer, his comm crackled with an incoming transmission on a frequency he had not authorized. Hellsing's, relayed through equipment Walter had apparently arranged in the hours since their first meeting. A gesture of cautious, provisional trust extended without ceremony. Optimus Prime. Integra's voice, clipped and urgent even through the compressed audio. I need you and whatever forces you can gather at Battersea within the hour. We have a situation developing that I believe concerns your war as much as mine. Explain, Optimus said, already signaling Ironhide and Bumblebee to ready themselves. Signals Intelligence intercepted communications an hour ago between what we believe is a Decepticon transmitter and a group my organization has hunted for 60 years, Integra said. An organization called Millennium. Nazi war criminals who fled into vampirism rather than face justice, and have spent decades preparing a second war they never got to finish. If your Decepticons have made contact with them, Optimus Prime, then whatever chaos your war and mine might separately have caused, we are about to face something considerably worse combined. Optimus felt something settle in his chassis. Not surprise, precisely. He had known Megatron long enough, across enough worlds and enough wars, to expect exactly this kind of calculation from him. Where Optimus sought allies through honesty and patience, Megatron sought instruments through opportunism and threat, and an organization built on total war and total ruthlessness was precisely the kind of instrument his old enemy would recognize as valuable. We will be there, Optimus said. Ironhide, Bumblebee, with me. I want eyes on whatever Battersea reveals before we commit to any course of action. They arrived to find the old power station's derelict shell crawling with Hellsing operatives in tactical gear, silver-loaded weapons trained on a perimeter that, as far as Optimus' scanners could determine, contained nothing at all, until Walter, standing at the edge of the cordon with his sword cane held loose and ready in one hand, gestured toward the building's shattered upper windows. Movement 20 minutes ago, Walter said. Then, nothing. My assessment, Optimus Prime, is that whoever was here left the moment they detected our approach, which suggests either extraordinary caution or advance warning we have not yet accounted for. Integra arrived moments later, flanked by Sarah's Victoria, her expression carrying the particular tightness of a commander who suspected, without yet being able to prove, exactly how badly the board had shifted beneath her. Talk to me, she said to Walter. The intercepted transmission originated from this location, Walter said. Decepticon signal signature, cross-referenced against the patterns your scout recorded during the initial crossing. Whatever meeting took place here, it is finished, and I would estimate we missed it by less than an hour. Optimus knelt at the station's shattered entrance, optics scanning residual energy traces with the meticulous care of a soldier who had tracked Decepticon movements across 100 battlefields and recognized, in the particular signature lingering in the ruined concrete, an unmistakable confirmation of Ironhide's worst suspicion. Megatron was here, he said quietly. Recently. And Sir Integra, there is a second energy signature layered beneath his, one I do not recognize from any Cybertronian source. He straightened, meeting her eyes with the particular gravity of a commander delivering news he wished, for once, that he could soften. I believe your intelligence was correct. Megatron has made contact with the organization you call Millennium. Integra's jaw tightened, and for a moment the mask of controlled command slipped just enough to show the exhaustion beneath it. A woman who had spent her entire adult life holding back one war, only to watch a second one arrive and immediately begin negotiating terms with the first. Then we no longer have the luxury of treating your Decepticons and Millennium as separate problems, she said. If Megatron has offered them resources, technology, weapons manufacturing, anything beyond mere cooperation, then whatever timeline I had assumed for Millennium's resurgence has almost certainly accelerated. What is your estimate? Optimus asked. Weeks, where I once assumed months. Days, if Megatron's technology proves as transformative as I fear. Integra's eyes tracked to the derelict power station's shattered windows, to the city beyond going about its careful, deliberate ignorance of the war assembling in its shadows. Optimus Prime, I extended you provisional trust 2 nights ago, because you offered to prove yourself rather than demand my faith outright. I am calling in that offer now. If your war has just handed Millennium the tools to finish what they started in 1945, then I need to know whether the Autobots intend to help me stop it, or whether you intend to remain neutral in a conflict your own faction has just made considerably more dangerous. Optimus was silent for a long moment, weighing not the decision itself, that had, in truth, been decided the moment he understood the shape of what Megatron had done, but the manner of stating it, the particular gravity such a commitment demanded. Megatron does not act from ideology, he said finally. He acts from opportunity, and he has never once cared what suffering his opportunism inflicts on those caught beneath it. If he has armed an organization capable of resuming a war that already cost this world tens of millions of lives, then the Autobots bear a measure of responsibility for what follows, not because we chose it, Sir Integra, but because our war followed us here, regardless of our intentions, and gave him the opening to do so. He met her eyes, and something in his optics carried the particular weight of a vow made and meant to be kept. I will not stand neutral while that unfolds. The Autobots will help you stop Millennium, whatever the cost, and whatever it requires of us in this world we did not ask to enter. Integra studied him for a long moment, this vast ancient warrior, kneeling amid the ruins of a derelict power station, offering a commitment with more apparent sincerity than most human allies had offered her in years of careful, self-interested diplomacy. Then welcome to Hellsing's war, Optimus Prime, she said finally, extending a hand that looked absurdly small against the scale of what she was reaching toward. I hope, for both our sakes, that your honesty proves sturdier than every other alliance I have made in this city. Optimus extended one massive digit, closing it with careful precision around her offered hand in a gesture that mirrored, as closely as his frame allowed, the human custom he had observed and catalogued since the crossing. It will hold, Sir Integra, he said. I give you my word as Prime. Behind them, unnoticed by either, Walter's expression carried the particular weight of a man who had served the Hellsing family long enough to recognize the precise moment an already complicated war had just become immeasurably more so. And beneath the manor across the river, in the cold dark of his cell, Alucard felt the shift in the city's balance like a change in barometric pressure, and smiled at the promise of the violence it foretold. Father Alexander Anderson had not slept in 3 days, and he did not intend to start now. He stood in a Vatican safe house tucked behind a shuttered bakery in Southwark, surrounded by a dozen of Iscariot's Section 13 operatives, watching grainy surveillance footage of a golden giant kneeling before Integra, Hellsing on a smoking embankment, and felt the old, familiar heat of righteous purpose kindling behind his round glasses. Bishop Maxwell wants a determination, said Sister Yumiko, the section's junior analyst, not looking up from the bank of monitors. Are they demonic, are they angelic, or are they simply an engineering problem too large for the Protestant witch to handle alone? They are none of those things and all of those things, Anderson said, tapping one thick finger against the screen, where Optimus Prime's kneeling silhouette filled the frame. They are power without a soul, sister. Power that walks and speaks and makes covenants, and has not once, in 3 days of surveillance, mentioned God. Do you understand what that means? That they're atheists? That they are a vacuum, Anderson said, and vacuums get filled. If the Almighty has no claim on whatever animates that steel, then something else does. And I would rather learn what that something is before Integra, Hellsing decides to arm it and point it at Rome's enemies as easily as her own. He straightened, cracking his neck with the particular relish of a man who had spent decades looking forward to violence in the service of faith. Bishop Maxwell has authorized a determination team. I intend to lead it. Maxwell's authorization arrived within the hour, delivered with the particular relish of a man who enjoyed complicating Integra, Hellsing's life, almost as much as he enjoyed complicating Satan's. Anderson read it twice, memorized its permissions, and burned the physical copy in the safe house's sink before it finished its second sentence. Old habit, older training. The particular tradecraft of an organization that had survived 5 centuries by leaving nothing behind for enemies to find. The judgment, Anderson said to his team, is simple. We do not ask whether these machines are good. We ask whether they answer to anything greater than their own war. If they do not, if they are simply power in service of nothing but their own survival, then Section XII's position is that they are, functionally, no different from the vampires Hellsing hunts, and deserve no gentler verdict. He arrived at the embankment perimeter 3 hours later, alone, coat flaring in the cold Thames wind, twin bayonets sheathed but never far from his hands. Hellsing's cordon operatives recognized him immediately. Iscariot's most infamous blade was not a man who traveled incognito, nor one who particularly wanted to, and let him through with the wary deference of people who had learned, at considerable cost, that stopping Alexander Anderson was rarely worth the attempt. Optimus Prime registered the priest's approach a full quarter-mile before he arrived, scanners flagging an energy signature that echoed, faintly, the same anomalous readings his sensors had recorded near Alucard, not identical, but adjacent, a cousin frequency in whatever unfamiliar spectrum this world's supernatural operated on. You are not Hellsing, Optimus said, as Anderson closed the final distance, his footsteps unhurried, his expression carrying the particular calm of a man who had faced down considerably larger monsters than a Cybertronian without once losing his composure. No, Anderson agreed. I am Iscariot, the sword of the Vatican, when the Vatican requires one, which is rather more often than the faithful would like to believe. He looked up and up and up at the towering machine before him, and something in his expression was not quite fear and not quite reverence, but held elements of both. I have come to ask you a question, machine, and I would ask that you answer it honestly, because I have killed liars before and found the exercise disappointingly unsatisfying compared to killing something that deserved it. Ask, Optimus said. Do you serve God? The question landed with more weight than its brevity suggested, and Optimus considered it with the same grave deliberation he gave every question that mattered. I do not know your God, he said finally. My people came from a world that knew gods of its own. The 13, the old primes, forces we honored without fully understanding. I do not know if your creator and mine are the same force wearing different names, or two things entirely apart. What I can tell you is that I serve a cause larger than myself. I have given my existence to the protection of those who cannot protect themselves, across worlds I will never fully understand, in service of an ideal I did not invent, and hope will outlive me. If that is not what you mean by serving God, then I cannot offer you the answer you came for. But it is the only honest one I have. Anderson studied him for a long moment, and something in the priest's weathered face shifted, not satisfaction precisely, but the particular recognition of a man who had spent his life sorting the world into the righteous and the damned, and had just encountered something that refused stubbornly to fit either category cleanly. That, Anderson said, is either the most honest answer I have received from anything not human in 20 years of this work, or the most sophisticated lie I've ever been told. I confess, machine, that I cannot yet tell which. He rested one hand on the hilt of a bayonet, not drawing it, but making its presence known. Iscariot's judgment on your kind remains open. I would advise you to understand what that means. If your war brings ruin to England's faithful the way it has already threatened to bring ruin to England's streets, I will not wait for Rome's patience to run out before I act. And you should know Optimus Prime, for I have learned your name, along with a great many other things about you, that I am rather difficult to stop once I have decided to start. I do not doubt it, Optimus said, but I would ask you to consider, Father Anderson, that judgment delivered before understanding is finished is rarely judgment at all. I have not come to threaten your faith or your flock. If my presence here proves a danger to either, I will answer for it. But I would ask the same patience of Iscariot that Hellsing has provisionally extended. Anderson's laugh was short, rough, and utterly without warmth. Hellsing's patience is a business transaction machine. She weighs your usefulness against your danger and adjusts her tolerance accordingly. Iscariot's patience is not for sale, and it is not infinite. But I will grant you this much. You are the first thing not born of God's creation I have met in this line of work that troubled itself to answer honestly rather than flatter me into complacency. That buys you time, not trust. Time. He turned, coat snapping in the wind, already walking back toward the cordon's edge. Use it wisely. I do not extend such offers twice. He was 3 steps into his retreat when the alert came through Optimus's comm. Ironhide's voice, tight with the particular urgency of a soldier who had just watched a bad situation become considerably worse. Optimus. We have a problem at the old gasworks, southeast perimeter. Ghouls, a lot of them, more than anything we've encountered since the crossing. And they're not wandering, they're organized. Something's directing them. Anderson stopped mid-stride, his expression sharpening with professional interest rather than alarm. Organized ghouls, he said, half to himself. That is not natural, even for Millennium's methods. Someone is commanding that swarm directly. He looked back at Optimus, and for just a moment, something like grim camaraderie passed between Priest and Autobot. 2 very different soldiers recognizing, simultaneously, the shape of a shared emergency. Well, Machine, it appears Iscariot's judgment will have to wait. There's work to do, and I find I would rather see how you handle real monsters before I decide what to do about the metaphorical variety. Optimus was already moving, signaling Bumblebee and Ironhide to converge, his processors racing through tactical projections for an engagement his scanners had never been designed to model. Father Anderson, if Millennium is testing our capabilities directly, I would value an ally who understands what we're about to face better than my own sensors do. Anderson drew both bayonets in a single fluid motion, silver catching the gray afternoon light, his grin sharp and sudden and entirely without mercy. Then let us go kill some monsters together, Optimus Prime, and see whether the Vatican's judgment on you improves or worsens by the results. Behind them, the gasworks' rusted towers had already begun to groan under the weight of something vast and hungry pressing up from below, and in the shadows 3 streets distant, unseen by Priest or Autobot alike, a figure in a long red coat watched the gathering storm with the patient, delighted stillness of a predator who had, at long last, found a night worth staying awake for. The gasworks had been derelict since the 70s, a skeleton of rusted iron towers and collapsed brick sheds that London's planning committees kept promising to redevelop and never quite got around to. It made, Optimus thought grimly as he arrived at the perimeter, an excellent staging ground for exactly the kind of atrocity Millennium seemed to specialize in: isolated, forgotten, easy to seal off from a city that had already trained itself not to look too closely at its own forgotten corners. The ghouls came up out of the earth like something the ground itself was vomiting. Ironhide's initial count had been conservative. What emerged from the gasworks' collapsed lower levels numbered in the hundreds, gray, hollow-eyed, moving with a coordination that Anderson confirmed grimly was not natural to their kind. Someone is commanding this swarm through a control-class vampire, Anderson said, bayonets already drawn. His priest's collar, the only incongruous note in a stance that read, in every other particular, as pure trained violence. Find the controller, Machine, and the swarm falls apart. Leave it standing, and it will grind through anything you throw at it, because ghouls do not fear death. They are already dead, and simply haven't finished falling down yet. Optimus processed the tactical shape of the problem with the swift clarity of a commander who had fought worse odds on worse worlds, and felt, beneath the clean geometry of a calculation, something considerably less clean: the growing certainty that this engagement would not resemble any battle his soldiers had fought before. Bumblebee. Ironhide. On me, he said. Father Anderson, I would ask your guidance on their weaknesses, if you're willing to offer it. Silver. Blessed ordnance. Beheading or sufficient destruction of the brainstem, though your cannons should manage that regardless of the theological particulars. Anderson's grin was sharp as his blades. Try not to let them overwhelm you by numbers, Machine. That is their only real strength, and Millennium knows it. The first wave hit Bumblebee's position like a wall of gray, hungry flesh, and it was here, in the visceral close-quarters horror of the fighting, that Ironhide's earlier warning proved itself entirely correct. This was not war as the Autobots understood it. Decepticons died in flashes of plasma and severed cable. Casualties clean in the specific way that combat between mechanical beings was clean, however brutal. Ghouls did not die cleanly. They came apart in wet, groaning collapses of ash and shadow that left Bumblebee's olfactory sensors registering something his combat logic had no framework for. The specific horror of destroying something that had, within the last few days or weeks, been a person. Optimus, Bumblebee's cobbled voice, crackled through comm static, strained in a way that had nothing to do with damage taken. These were people. I know, Optimus said, driving his fist through a cluster of 3 ghouls with more force than the engagement strictly required. Some old grief of his own surfacing at the confirmation. Millennium turns victims into weapons, Bumblebee. Everyone we destroy tonight is a mercy we are too late to offer them in any other form. I wish that made it easier. It does not. Ironhide fought with the particular fury of a soldier translating old battlefield trauma into new context, his cannon carving trenches through the advancing swarm. And it was Ironhide, scanning the chaos with battle-honed instinct, who first spotted the controller, a lone figure standing atop the gasworks' tallest surviving tower, watching the carnage below with the serene, unhurried interest of someone attending a particularly satisfying opera. Optimus. Tower position, 12 o'clock. That's our controller. I'd stake my spark on it. Anderson followed Ironhide's gesture, and his expression hardened into something considerably colder than his earlier battlefield grin. Rip Van Winkle, he said, recognition and old hatred sharpening his voice. One of Millennium's most dangerous. A sniper who fires enchanted silver rounds that split into dozens on impact. She could have killed half your soldiers already if she wished. She is not testing a swarm machine. She is testing you. As if summoned by her own name, the figure on the tower, a young woman in an anachronistic military uniform, rifle cradled with the casual confidence of someone who had never once missed a shot she cared to make, raised her weapon and fired a single round directly at Optimus Prime's chest plate. The shot split mid-flight into a dozen smaller projectiles, each one striking a different vulnerable seam in his armor with surgical precision that spoke of either extraordinary luck or reconnaissance considerably more thorough than the Autobots had accounted for. Optimus staggered, systems flaring warning alerts across a cascade of minor breaches, and felt, for the first time since the crossing, the particular vulnerability of fighting an enemy who understood his physiology better than his own scanners understood hers. She's been watching us, Optimus said, processing the implication with grim clarity even as he advanced through the ghoul's swarm toward the tower, studying our weaknesses since the crossing. Millennium has had 60 years to perfect the art of studying an enemy before engaging it, Anderson said, cutting down a ghoul with brutal efficiency. Do not mistake this skirmish for their true offensive machine. This is reconnaissance dressed as violence. They are learning exactly how much force it takes to hurt you, and they are doing it while your attention is fixed on a swarm they consider entirely expendable. The realization landed with the particular weight of a strategic error already committed. Optimus understood, in the same instant Anderson articulated it, that Millennium's true intention here had never been the ghoul swarm at all. It was information. Every seam his armor exposed, every tactic his soldiers employed, every weakness Rip Van Winkle's silver rounds located was being catalogued, somewhere, for use against them later, in an engagement considerably more consequential than a skirmish at a derelict gasworks. Ironhide. Fall back from the swarm. Target the sniper directly. She's the true threat here. But Rip Van Winkle had already anticipated the shift, her rifle tracking Ironhide's advance with the same eerie precision that had found Optimus's seams, and the shot that followed took Ironhide's cannon arm at a joint his own scanners had not flagged as vulnerable until the exact moment it failed. She's not shooting randomly. Ironhide grunted through the pain feedback, servos sparking where the joint had been. She's hitting exactly where our armor's weakest. Optimus, this isn't a soldier. This is a scalpel. Anderson moved before Optimus could formulate a response, his blessed bayonet already in flight, a throw calculated across decades of practice against exactly this kind of long-range threat. And though the blade did not reach the tower, its trajectory forced Rip Van Winkle to break her firing stance. granting the Autobots the half-second of reprieve they needed to finish clearing the swarm's remaining ranks. "She'll withdraw now," Anderson said, retrieving his blade with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this exact maneuver 100 times before. Millennium does not waste assets on engagements they've already extracted sufficient value from. Whatever she came here to learn, machine, she has already learned it, and no further violence from us will change that fact. He was right. By the time the last ghoul dissolved into ash beneath Bumblebee's fists, the tower stood empty. Rip Van Winkle vanished into the London dark with whatever tactical data she had gathered, leaving the Autobots standing amid a battlefield of dissolved victims and the particular, hollow exhaustion of a fight that had cost them more than it had won them. "We were tested," Optimus said quietly, surveying the gasworks ruins, "and I fear we did not pass as well as I would have liked." "No," Anderson agreed, sheathing his blades with grim finality. "You did not. But you survived it, machine, and more importantly, you grieved for the dead they threw at you instead of simply discarding them as obstacles. That is not nothing. In my considerable experience with monsters, it is in fact quite rare." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Optimus Prime with an expression that had shifted, subtly, from wary assessment toward something almost like respect. "Iscariot's judgment remains open. But I confess, Optimus Prime, you are making it considerably harder for me to close it in the direction Bishop Maxwell would prefer." He vanished into the smoke and ruined the way he had appeared, abruptly, without ceremony, leaving Optimus alone with his soldiers amid the wreckage of a fight that had taught them, in the cruelest way possible, exactly how much this world's war differed from every battlefield that had come before it. "Optimus," Bumblebee said quietly, his voice assembled from careful fragments. "Was that mercy? What we did tonight? Was it mercy? Or was it just killing, dressed up in better words?" Optimus considered the question with the full weight it deserved, watching ash settle across cobblestones already stained with 100 years of London's older human violence. "I do not know, old friend," he said finally. "I suspect it may be both. And I suspect we will need to make peace with that uncertainty if we intend to survive what is coming. Millennium did not send that swarm to defeat us tonight. They sent it to learn how to defeat us later. We must be ready for that reckoning before it arrives, and I fear after tonight that it will arrive sooner than any of us are prepared for." Integra received the gasworks report within the hour, and by the time Optimus Prime and his soldiers arrived back at Hellsing Manor, damaged and grim, she had already reached a conclusion that Optimus suspected he was not going to like. "They tested you," she said, without preamble, standing at the head of the war room's long table with Walter at her side, and a tactical display already populated with everything Harkness's recovery teams had cataloged at the gasworks. "Catalog your weaknesses, your response patterns, your soldiers' individual vulnerabilities. That is not the behavior of an enemy who intends a fair fight, Optimus Prime. That is the behavior of an enemy preparing to win before the battle even begins." "I am aware," Optimus said. Ironhide's damaged arm hung at his side, servos still sparking intermittently despite Ratchet's field repairs, a visible reminder of exactly how costly the evening's reconnaissance had been. "What would you have us do differently?" Integra's expression carried the particular hardness of a commander about to propose something she suspected would cost her more than it gained her, and did not intend to apologize for it regardless. "I want you to consider a strike," she said. "Not reactive, not defensive. We have identified, through decades of surveillance and tonight's fresh intelligence, at least 3 probable Millennium staging locations within Greater London. I want to hit them before their offensive begins. Hard, decisively, with enough force that whatever timeline the Major has planned collapses under the weight of losing his infrastructure before he can use it." "A preemptive strike," Optimus said slowly. "Yes. Against targets you have not fully confirmed. Against a facility that may include, alongside Millennium soldiers, civilians they have taken, converted, or are holding for purposes we do not yet understand." Integra's jaw tightened, and Optimus recognized, in the flicker of something almost like guilt crossing her expression, that he had identified precisely the weakness in her proposal that she had hoped he would not press. "There will be casualties either way, Optimus Prime. The only question is whether they occur on ground and timing of our choosing, or on ground and timing of millenniums. That is not the only question, Optimus said, and something in his voice carried the particular gravity of a line being drawn, deliberately and without apology. You are asking me to commit my soldiers to an offensive strike against a target we have not confirmed, on the possibility, not the certainty, Sir Integra, the possibility that doing so prevents a greater harm later. I have fought that calculation before on other worlds, in other wars. I have watched commanders I respected convince themselves that preemptive violence against uncertain targets was the responsible choice, the necessary choice, the choice that would save more lives than it cost. I have also watched what happens when that calculation proves wrong, and civilians who might have survived a defensive war instead become casualties of an offensive one launched on incomplete information. So your answer is no. Integra's voice had gone flat, controlled in the way Optimus was beginning to recognize as her particular method of containing anger rather than expressing it. My answer, Optimus said, is that I will not commit the Autobots to striking a target we have not confirmed is what you believe it to be. If your intelligence identifies a millennium staging ground with certainty, not probability, Sir Integra, certainty, I will discuss tactics with you. But I did not survive 1,000,000 years of war by learning that violence justified by uncertain intelligence is any less costly than the violence it claims to prevent. I have watched my own cause commit that error. I will not help you commit it here. Walter, who had remained silent through the exchange, spoke now with the careful diplomacy of a man who had served Integra long enough to recognize when both parties in an argument were, in their own ways, correct. Sir Integra, if I may, Optimus Prime's caution is not unreasonable. Our intelligence on the gasworks confirmed a millennium presence only after the engagement had already occurred. We do not currently possess the same certainty regarding the 3 locations under consideration. I am aware of our intelligence limitations, Walter, Integra said, sharper than she likely intended. I am also aware that Millennium is not waiting for our certainty to catch up with their preparations. Every day we spend confirming targets to Optimus Prime's satisfaction is a day the Major spends finishing whatever he has planned. Then let us spend those days gathering the confirmation your caution requires, Optimus said, rather than spending them on an offensive that risks becoming exactly the atrocity you are trying to prevent. Sir Integra, I understand your urgency. I do not dismiss it, but I have made promises to my own soldiers as much as I have made them to you. And one of those promises is that we do not become the thing we are fighting simply because the alternative feels too slow. The war room fell into a silence that stretched long enough for Integra to reach for the cigar she'd been denying herself since the gasworks report arrived, light it this time, and take a single long drag before speaking again, a small, deliberate concession to the argument's weight, though nothing in her expression suggested surrender. You realize, she said finally, that this is precisely the kind of principled restraint that gets people killed in my line of work. I have buried operatives, Optimus Prime, because someone above them decided that certainty was worth more than speed. I have also buried operatives because someone decided speed was worth more than certainty. There is no version of this war where the moral ledger balances cleanly. There's only the version where I make the least bad choice available to me and live with whatever costs. I understand that better than you may credit me for, Optimus said. I have made that same calculation, Sir Integra, more times than I can number, across wars that cost me soldiers I will grieve for the rest of my existence. I am not asking you to abandon urgency. I am asking you to let me contribute what caution I can to a decision that will cost lives regardless of which direction we choose. That is the only value I believe I can offer you here, not agreement, but a second perspective weighing the same terrible arithmetic from a different angle. Integra studied him for a long moment, cigar smoke curling toward the war room's high stone ceiling, and something in her expression shifted, not agreement, not quite, but the particular respect of a commander recognizing another commander's willingness to hold a line even at the cost of the alliance itself. Very well, she said finally. We gather confirmation. 48 hours, Optimus Prime. That is the tolerance I am willing to extend before caution becomes indistinguishable from paralysis. Walter, redirect every available asset toward confirming the Isle of Dogs facility. If that location proves what I suspect it is, I will expect the Autobots' full cooperation without further debate on the principle of the thing. You will have it, Optimus said. I do not ask you to wait indefinitely, Sir Integra. I ask only that when we act on ground solid enough that neither of us has to carry the weight of a mistake we could have avoided. She nodded once, sharp, and turned back to the tactical display, already reassembling her calculations around the 48-hour window she had just conceded, a concession, Optimus understood, that had cost her something real, made not because she believed him entirely right, but because some part of her had recognized, in his refusal, the same quality that had made her extend him provisional trust in the first place. A commander who held his principles, even when holding them was inconvenient, expensive, and slower than the moment demanded. Outside the war room's tall windows, London's night sky remained clear of any second rift, clear of any further warning. But beneath that deceptive calm, in a chapel across the river, the Major had already begun the final calculations of his own patient 60-year war, entirely indifferent to whatever principled restraint the newly arrived Star Soldier and the Hellsing Huntress had just, however uneasily, agreed to extend each other. The 48 hours Integra had conceded did not pass quietly for anyone. Across the river, in the gutted warehouse Megatron had claimed as Decepticon territory, Barricade returned from a second meeting with Captain Gunch, carrying data that made even Starscream's habitual sneer falter into something closer to genuine unease. They have shown me the vault, Barricade reported, projecting a captured data feed across the warehouse floor, grainy footage of a subterranean chamber lined with capsules, each containing something vast and dormant, vaguely humanoid, vaguely not. Millennium's last battalion, Lord Megatron. Not soldiers converted from the battlefield. Soldiers manufactured. Vampiric infantry grown in these vessels by the thousands, held in reserve since the 40s, awaiting activation. Megatron studied the footage with the particular stillness of a strategist recalculating an already favorable equation. A standing army, immune to conventional destruction, requiring no supply lines, no logistics beyond whatever sustains their condition. His optics gleamed. And they offer this to us as evidence of good faith. They offer it as evidence of capability, Lord Megatron. Gunch was explicit. The Major wishes our cooperation to extend beyond mere convenience. He proposes technological exchange. Cybertronian weapons, systems integrated into the last battalion's arsenal. In return, Millennium offers us manufacturing capacity, human infrastructure, and every resource this world's shadow economy has accumulated across 60 years of patient preparation. Starscream, recovering his composure, stepped forward with the particular hunger of a lieutenant who had abruptly stopped questioning the Alliance's wisdom the moment its scale became apparent. Weapon systems integrated with an army that cannot be killed by conventional means. Lord Megatron, consider the campaign such a force could wage. I am already considering it, Starscream, Megatron said, without looking at him, his attention fixed entirely on the dormant capsules still rotating through Barricade's projection. Which is precisely why I intend to proceed carefully. An ally who offers this much this quickly is either a fool or has calculated that our value to them exceeds whatever they are giving away. The Major does not strike me as a fool. He straightened, servos grinding with decision. Barricade. Accept the technological exchange, limited scope, nothing that grants them true insight into Cybertronian core systems. I want their vampiric infantry equipped with Decepticon-grade targeting arrays and energy weapons, nothing more. And I want continuous surveillance on that vault. If the Major intends to use us as a stepping stone toward his own ends, I would prefer to know the shape of that betrayal before it arrives rather than after. It was, Frenzy observed privately to Barricade as they departed the meeting, exactly the kind of calculated trust Megatron had built an empire on. Extend just enough cooperation to extract maximum value, while positioning every asset to survive the inevitable moment the Alliance soured. They did not know, as they returned to the warehouse, that they had been watched. Alucard had followed the scent of the meeting from a considerable distance, not out of any directive from Integra, who remained unaware of his movements, as she so often was, but from the same restless curiosity that had drawn him to Bumblebee 3 nights prior. He had circled the vault's location twice, invisible to Decepticon scanners built for detecting mass and energy rather than shadow and old malevolence, and had come away from the reconnaissance with an assessment considerably darker than anything Barricade had reported to his commander. Thousands, Alucard thought, savoring the scale of the horror with the particular relish of a connoisseur encountering a vintage he had not tasted in decades. Asterisk, an army of the manufactured dead, waiting 60 years for someone foolish enough to wake them all at once. Millennium's patience has always been their most dangerous weapon, more dangerous than any single soldier they field. And now they have machines from the stars lending steel to their teeth. Asterisk. He returned to Hellsing Manor as dawn broke gray over the Thames, materializing in Integra's private study with a casual disregard for locked doors that had long since stopped surprising her, and found her exactly where he expected, awake, working, a fresh cigar burning unattended in an ashtray beside a mountain of surveillance reports. "You look tired, Master," Alucard said, settling into the shadow behind her desk with theatrical languor. "Tired, and no closer to your 48-hour confirmation, I suspect, than you were when you promised your steel soldier this delay. If you have something useful, Alucard, offer it. If you have come merely to observe my exhaustion, I would prefer you did so silently. Oh, I have something considerably more useful than mere observation." His grin sharpened, red eyes catching what little lamplight the study offered. "I have found your Isle of Dogs facility, Master, though I suspect it will disappoint you to learn it is not the true target Optimus Prime's caution should be worried about. It is a distraction, a decoy, dressed convincingly enough that your intelligence services would confirm it within their 48 hours and consider the matter settled." Integra's exhaustion sharpened instantly into focus. "Explain." "I followed a rather interesting meeting tonight between your machine's enemy and Millennium's inner circle. What I found beneath London was not a staging ground, Master. It was a vault. Thousands of vampiric soldiers, manufactured rather than converted, held dormant since the war's end and awaiting activation. The Isle of Dogs facility your intelligence has been chasing is a fraction of Millennium's true capacity, offered up deliberately, I suspect, as bait for exactly the kind of confirmed strike you were preparing to launch." Integra sat back slowly, the full shape of the trap settling over her with the particular cold clarity of a commander realizing how narrowly she had avoided walking into it. "They wanted us to hit the decoy, expend resources, declare victory, stand down our guard, while the true army remained untouched beneath whatever location actually houses it." "Precisely, Master. Your machine's caution, however inconvenient it felt to you 3 nights ago, may have just saved you from playing directly into the Major's hand." Alucard's amusement deepened, red eyes gleaming with the particular delight of a predator watching 2 prey species inadvertently protect each other. "I confess I did not expect to find myself grateful to a Cybertronian's principles. The sensation is novel. I am not certain I care for it. Where is the true vault?" "That," Alucard admitted, "I have not yet located. Millennium has hidden it well, better than 60 years of patient concealment should reasonably allow, which tells me the Major has resources even I did not fully credit him with. But I will find it, Master. It has been rather a long time since something in this city gave me a hunt worth the effort." He dissolved back into shadow before Integra could press further, leaving her alone with the study's mounting reports and the particular, grim clarity of a commander who had just learned that her 48-hour compromise with Optimus Prime had, against every instinct she'd carried into the argument, very nearly saved her from a catastrophic error. She found Optimus at the embankment an hour later, delivering the revised intelligence with the flat, professional efficiency of someone unaccustomed to admitting an ally's caution had proven correct. "Your instinct was right," she said, without preamble. "The facility we were preparing to confirm and strike was a decoy. Millennium's true reserves are elsewhere, hidden well enough that even my most dangerous asset has not yet located them." Optimus absorbed this without visible satisfaction, no vindication in his bearing, only the grim weight of confirmation that the threat they faced was larger and more carefully prepared than either of them had initially calculated. Then we have gained time, but not certainty. And Millennium has gained confirmation that we are cautious enough to be misdirected rather than provoked into hasty error. Small mercies, Integra said. I would rather they think us cautious than reckless. If the alternative was walking my organization and your soldiers into a trap of their design. She studied him for a long moment. Something in her expression carrying the particular reassessment of a commander recalibrating her respect for an ally's judgment. I do not enjoy admitting when I am wrong, Optimus Prime. I find myself doing it with unusual frequency since your arrival. I would rather earn your trust through being right occasionally, Optimus said, than lose it entirely through convincing you to be wrong once decisively, when the cost could not be undone. We have gained a reprieve, Sir Integra. I would suggest we use it wisely, because whatever the Major is protecting behind this decoy, its scale suggests he does not intend to skirmish when he finally reveals it. Above them, the gray London sky held no answers, only the particular, patient stillness of a storm still gathering strength before it broke. And beneath the city, in a vault Alucard had not yet found, the Major's manufactured army continued its silent, dormant wait for the moment its long-deferred war would finally resume. The true vault revealed itself not through Alucard's hunting, nor through Hellsing's intelligence, but through the Major's own impatience, a man who had waited 60 years for his war and found, in the final stretch before its resumption, that he could no longer resist the theater of announcing himself. The signal reached every intelligence network in London simultaneously, a broadcast pirated across emergency frequencies and civilian television alike, showing the Major's grotesque, beaming face against a backdrop of swastika-marked banners that had not been displayed publicly in Europe for 80 years. Good evening, England, the Major said, his wet, rolling laugh filling airwaves from Buckingham to Birmingham. I do apologize for the interruption to your regularly scheduled programming, but I felt it only fair to warn you. The war you thought ended in 1945 never actually finished. It merely paused out of respect for exhaustion rather than resolution. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we resume. Integra watched the broadcast from the war room with the particular fury of a commander who had just watched 60 years of careful containment collapse in the space of 90 seconds. He's declaring war on live television, she said. He wants the panic. He wants London paralyzed with fear before his forces even move. He wants something else too, Walter said grimly, gesturing to the broadcast's final seconds, where the feed cut to grainy footage of a London dockyard, the true vault finally revealed, its location no longer hidden because hiding it no longer served the Major's purpose. He wants us to know exactly where to find him, Sir Integra. This is not concealment anymore. This is invitation. An invitation to what? To his terms, Walter said. The Major has never fought a war he did not intend to win decisively, publicly, and with maximum theatrical cruelty. He is not hiding his forces because he no longer fears our response. He believes, now, that his response to us will settle the matter. Optimus received the broadcast coordinates within minutes, and the tactical picture that assembled itself as Hellsing's reconnaissance drones swept the dockyard confirmed every fear Alucard's earlier reconnaissance had raised, multiplied by an order of magnitude neither ally had fully anticipated. Thousands of vampiric soldiers, no longer dormant, moving with the disciplined precision of an army that had spent decades training for exactly this awakening. And at their center, towering even among ranks of enhanced soldiers, a figure whose presence alone made Optimus's threat assessment protocols, flag warnings his systems had never before needed to generate. Sir Integra, Optimus said, studying the drone footage with grave attention. Who is that? Integra's expression tightened into something that carried, for the first time since Optimus had met her, genuine and unconcealed dread. The captain, she said. Millennium's monstrous vampire soldier, the Major's personal champion, and the single most dangerous combatant any of Hellsing's records have ever catalogued. He has fought and destroyed werewolves that took entire units to bring down. He has survived injuries that should have ended even a true vampire's existence. My father's generation fought him once, decades ago, and lost more men in that single engagement than in the rest of the organization's history combined. His capabilities? Superhuman strength beyond even Millennium's usual soldiers. Regeneration that outpaces conventional damage by an order of magnitude. And a particular, terrible resilience to exactly the kind of overwhelming force your soldiers rely on Optimus Prime. The more damage he sustains, the more monstrous and powerful he becomes, as though injury itself feeds whatever engine drives him. She met his optics with grim honesty. I do not know if your armor can stop him. I am not certain anything in my organization's arsenal has ever definitively stopped him. Ironhide, still favoring the arm damaged at the gasworks, absorbed this assessment with the particular grim humor of a soldier calculating odds he did not care for. Sounds like we finally found something that might actually give a Decepticon pause too, if Megatron's arming Millennium's rank and file with our own weapons technology. Wonder how the captain feels about facing down a plasma cannon. We may find out sooner than any of us would prefer, Optimus said. Sir Integra, if this is the Major's true offensive, beginning now, then whatever restraint we exercised in confirming targets no longer serves any purpose. He has shown us exactly where he intends to fight. I would ask your counsel on how we meet that invitation. Integra's answer came without hesitation. 60 years of Hellsing doctrine crystallizing into the particular clarity of a commander who had spent her entire life preparing for precisely this moment, however much she had hoped it would never arrive. We meet it with everything we have, she said. Full Hellsing deployment. Every operative, every asset, Alucard unleashed without restraint for the first time in years. And I would ask Optimus Prime that the Autobots stand with us, not as allies of convenience, but as a unified front. If Millennium intends to test the full weight of what we can bring against them, I would rather they discover that weight includes everything, rather than learning our limits piecemeal. You will have every soldier I can commit, Optimus said. Though I would ask one honest accounting in return. Sir Integra, do you believe we can win this? Integra's silence lasted long enough to answer the question before her words did. I believe, she said finally, that we can make the cost of this war higher than the Major anticipated. Whether that constitutes winning Optimus Prime is a question I suspect none of us will be able to answer honestly until it is already finished. The mobilization that followed consumed the remainder of the night, Hellsing operatives deploying in coordinated waves toward the dockyard perimeter, Iscariot Section 13 arriving unannounced and uninvited, but tacitly permitted, given the scale of the threat. Father Anderson himself materializing at the staging ground with a particular grim satisfaction of a man who had finally found a battle worthy of Rome's full attention. The Autobots assembled at the dockyard's northern approach, Optimus at their center, Ironhide and Bumblebee flanking him. Every soldier aware that whatever came next would test them in ways the gasworks, skirmish, had only begun to suggest. It was Bumblebee, scanning the assembling Millennium ranks through the pre-dawn gloom, who first registered the captain's full scale, a figure whose silhouette alone dwarfed even the Decepticon barricade, armor plates of some ancient, unfamiliar design fused seamlessly with flesh that should not, by any biological logic Bumblebee sensors could process, have supported a frame of that size. Optimus, Bumblebee said, his cobbled voice carrying an edge of something close to genuine alarm. I don't think our weapons are going to be enough. Then we will need more than weapons, Optimus said, watching the captain's distant silhouette with the particular stillness of a commander facing, for the first time since the crossing, an enemy whose scale genuinely threatened to exceed his own. We will need everything this world and ours can bring to bear, fighting together rather than separately, because I do not believe any single force among us, Autobot, Hellsing, or Iscariot, can face what is gathering at that dockyard alone. Behind the assembled ranks, unseen by mortal or machine, a shape in a wide-brimmed hat finally allowed himself a genuine unguarded smile, the particular expression of a predator who had waited for centuries for an opponent worth the full and terrible extent of his own considerable power, and had found at last that the wait was over. At last, Alucard thought, crimson eyes fixed on the distant dockyard where the captain's silhouette loomed against the brightening sky. Asterisk, a war worth fighting properly. Let us see, old soldier. whether your master's patience was worth 60 years of waiting, asterisk. The Battle of London Dockyard began not with a declaration, but with the Major's laughter, broadcast one final time across every frequency Millennium had commandeered, rolling out over the assembled ranks of Hellsing operatives, Iscariot enforcers, and Autobot soldiers like the opening note of an opera the Major had spent 60 years composing. Let the Second War begin. His voice crackled through the dockyard speakers, and then the vampiric ranks surged forward as one. Thousands of soldiers who had waited decades in dormant capsules, now moving with the terrible, disciplined hunger of an army finally permitted to fight. Optimus Prime met the first wave at the perimeter's edge, his frame absorbing the initial collision with the grim, practiced efficiency of a warrior who had led charges across 100 worlds. But even his combat processors, calibrated across 1,000,000 years of war, registered the sheer, overwhelming scale of what Hellsing's forces now faced. Where Decepticons fell in flashes of plasma and clean mechanical ruin, Millennium soldiers came apart only reluctantly, regenerating from wounds that should have ended them, absorbing damage that would have felled a dozen conventional enemies before finally, grudgingly, dissolving into ash. "They're not stopping," Ironhide reported, cannon arm burning through ammunition faster than his tactical projections had allowed for. Optimists were grinding through them, but there's no end to the ranks. Every one we destroy, 3 more take its place. "Focus fire on the command structure," Optimus ordered, driving through a cluster of soldiers toward the dockyard's central staging ground. If Millennium's forces are directed rather than autonomous, disrupting their command may fracture the coordination that's letting them absorb our losses so effectively. Across the battlefield, Alexander Anderson fought with the particular, terrible joy of a man finally unleashed against an enemy that justified every year of training Iscariot had poured into him. Bayonets flashing silver in the pre-dawn dark, blessed steel finding throats and hearts with a precision that spoke of decades spent perfecting exactly this brutal choreography. "Come then," he roared into the chaos, laughing with something that was not quite madness, but bordered close enough to unsettle even his own Section 13 operatives. "Come and see what the Vatican's judgment looks like when it finally arrives in full." Sarah's Victoria fought at Integra's flank, her borrowed discipline finally giving way to something closer to the terrible potential Alucard had always seen coiled within her, cutting through Millennium's ranks with a ferocity that surprised even herself, while Integra directed the wider battle from a mobile command position, watching her carefully assembled tactical picture fragment under the sheer weight of an enemy that had spent 60 years preparing precisely for this scale of engagement. It was the captain's arrival at the battle's center that changed everything. He moved through the dockyard's ruined warehouses like a force of nature rather than a soldier, brushing aside Hellsing operatives with casual, contemptuous ease, his massive frame shrugging off silver rounds and blessed ordnance alike with barely a flicker of acknowledgement. Anderson met him first, blades flashing in a combination that had ended lesser monsters in seconds, and watched, with grim professional horror, as the captain simply absorbed the damage, wounds sealing almost as quickly as they opened, his monstrous strength growing with every injury sustained rather than diminishing. "He feeds on damage," Anderson snarled into his comm, retreating from an engagement he recognized, with the particular clarity of a veteran, that he could not win alone. "The more you hurt him, the stronger he becomes. Whatever hits you land, make them count, because a wounded animal is not what we're facing here. We're facing something that wants to be wounded." Optimus arrived at the engagement moments later, driving between Anderson and the captain's next advance with the full mass of his frame, and felt, in the single bone-jarring impact that followed, exactly how thoroughly Hellsing's warnings had understated the threat. The captain's fist struck his chest plate with force that buckled armor rated to withstand direct plasma cannon fire, and Optimus staggered back through a collapsing warehouse wall, processors flagging damage reports across systems that had never, in 1,000,000 years of war, registered an organic opponent capable of matching Decepticon-grade impact force. "So," the captain rumbled, his voice carrying the particular, terrible amusement of something that had waited decades for an opponent worth its full attention, "the Star Soldier fights." "Good. I grew tired of soft prey." Ironhide and Bumblebee converged on Optimus's position, weapons raised, and the 3 Autobots faced the captain together, A coordination that bought them, for the first time in the engagement, something approaching parity, plasma fire and cannon rounds, forcing the captain to actually defend rather than simply advance through whatever stood before him. It was in this moment, with the battle's outcome still genuinely uncertain, that Megatron made his entrance. The Decepticon leader descended into the dockyard's chaos, flanked by Barricade and Starscream, his optics tracking the battlefield with the cold, calculating precision of a strategist who had waited for exactly this moment, the point at which every other faction present had exhausted itself sufficiently that a fresh, decisive force could seize whatever remained standing. Interesting, Megatron said, surveying the carnage with something close to satisfaction. How thoroughly you've all worn each other down for me. His weapon systems primed, targeting not Millennium's ranks, but Optimus Prime's exposed flank. I did not come here to save you, Optimus. I came to ensure that whatever survives this night's slaughter answers to me rather than to your tedious principles. The plasma blast that followed caught Optimus mid-recovery from the captain's earlier strike, and for the first time since the crossing, Optimus Prime found himself facing three simultaneous threats: Megatron's opportunistic betrayal, the captain's monstrous resilience, and Millennium's endless, regenerating ranks, with a clarity that stripped away every diplomatic calculation and left only the raw, desperate arithmetic of survival. Megatron. Optimus roared, turning to meet his oldest enemy even as the captain advanced from his other flank. You would side with monsters who manufacture their own soldiers from stolen lives, rather than stand against them? I would side, Megatron said, weapons already cycling for a second strike. With whichever outcome leaves me standing at the end of this night, Optimus. You have never understood that principle is a luxury only the victorious can afford. Tonight, I intend to remind you of that lesson one final time. Across the dockyard, Integra watched the three-way collision unfold with the particular, sick clarity of a commander realizing that her carefully assembled alliance had just fractured into something considerably more chaotic than she had prepared for. Hellsing and Iscariot fighting Millennium's endless ranks. The Autobots now fighting both Millennium's captain and Megatron's opportunistic betrayal simultaneously. The entire battlefield collapsing into a chaos that no single faction's doctrine had ever been designed to survive. Walter, she said, voice tight with the particular fury of a woman watching a carefully built plan disintegrate in real time. Get me Alucard. Now. If there was ever a night that justified his full unrestrained release, it is this one. Deep beneath the manor, in a cell that had held him for years under careful restriction, Alucard felt Integra's summons arrive like a long-awaited invitation to a party he had been dressed for since the rift first opened. His grin stretched wide, red eyes blazing with for centuries of contained hunger finally given permission to run free. At last, he thought, rising from the shadows that had contained him, feeling the manor's old wards part before him like a curtain finally drawn back. Let us see what London looks like when I stop holding back. Above the dockyard, the sky had begun to lighten toward a bloody, smoke-choked dawn, and in the chaos below, three ancient wars, one from the stars, one from the trenches of a war that never truly ended, and one from the oldest darkness England had ever harbored, finally collided in full, catastrophic force. Alucard arrived at the dockyard the way a verdict arrives, inevitable, absolute, and utterly without mercy. He did not walk into the battle. He simply was there, materializing at its bloodiest center in the space between one heartbeat and the next, and the effect on Millennium's ranks was immediate and visceral. Soldiers who had shrugged off silver rounds and blessed steel alike found themselves recoiling, some ancient and unkillable instinct recognizing, before their conscious minds could process it, exactly what had just entered the field. Ah, Alucard said, surveying the carnage with the particular delight of a connoisseur finally offered a meal worthy of his palate. Now this is a party worth attending properly. He moved through Millennium soldiers like a scythe through wheat. His usual restraint, the careful, deliberate limitation Integra had maintained on him for years, entirely absent for the first time since Optimus Prime had arrived in this world. Where Hellsing operatives had ground slowly through the vampiric ranks, Alucard simply unmade them, his shadowhounds tearing through soldier after soldier with a hunger that had waited far too long for exactly this scale of violence. But it was toward the captain that his true attention turned. "You," Alucard said, appearing suddenly in the massive vampire's path, red eyes blazing with an intensity that made even the captain's monstrous confidence flicker, "have been the reason I have not slept properly in 60 years. Do you know that? The Major's little pet project. The unkillable soldier who fed on wounds instead of fearing them." His grin widened into something that was no longer remotely human. "I have wanted to test that claim myself for a very long time." The engagement that followed defied every tactical framework Optimus Prime's processors had ever catalogued. Alucard did not fight the captain so much as unravel him. Strikes that should have killed a dozen conventional enemies simply passed through shadow, where flesh had been a moment before, while Alucard's own counterattacks tore through the captain's regenerating frame with a savagery that finally, for the first time in the battle, seemed to outpace even Millennium's champion's monstrous resilience. "He's not just stronger," Bumblebee reported, watching the engagement with something between awe and horror. "He's older. Whatever the captain is, Alucard's been doing this longer, and it shows." Optimus, meanwhile, had turned his full attention back toward Megatron, the two ancient enemies trading blows amid the dockyard's collapsing structures with the grim, familiar rhythm of a rivalry that had outlived a dozen worlds already. "Even here," Optimus said, driving Megatron back through a collapsing warehouse wall, "even in a war that is not ours, you cannot resist making it about your own conquest." "Every war is about conquest, Optimus," Megatron snarled, weapons cycling for another strike. "You simply refuse to admit it, dressing your own ambitions in the language of principle instead. Tonight, I intend to prove, once and for all, which philosophy this new world will remember." It was Starscream, watching the battle's chaos with a particular calculation of a lieutenant who had spent the entire engagement quietly reassessing his own loyalties, who made the decision that would determine the night's outcome. As Megatron pressed his advantage against Optimus, Starscream's optics tracked the wider battlefield. Alucard's devastating assault on the captain, Millennium's ranks finally beginning to falter under the combined weight of Hellsing, Iscariot, and Autobot resistance, and the growing, undeniable reality that Millennium's offensive was collapsing regardless of whatever advantage Megatron's opportunism had briefly secured. "Lord Megatron," Starscream said, breaking from his own engagement, "the tide is turning against Millennium. If we remain committed to this alliance, as their forces collapse, we risk being caught in the collapse alongside them." Megatron's optics flickered with the particular fury of a strategist, watching his calculated advantage evaporate faster than anticipated. But his response carried the same cold pragmatism that had guided every decision since the crossing. "Then we withdraw," he said, breaking from his engagement with Optimus with deliberate, unhurried contempt. "This was never my war to win, Optimus. I extracted what value I could from Millennium's chaos, and I will extract myself just as easily now that the chaos no longer serves me." "You would abandon your allies mid-battle?" Optimus said, though the question carried no real surprise, only the grim confirmation of exactly the character he had always known his oldest enemy to possess. "I would call it," Megatron said, already retreating toward the dockyard's edge with Barricade and Starscream falling in behind him, "a lesson in the difference between alliance and instrument, Optimus. Millennium never understood that distinction. I suspect the Major is about to learn it rather more painfully than I intend to." His optics gleamed one final time before he vanished into the smoke and chaos. "This is not finished between us. It never is. But tonight belongs to whatever remains standing when the ash settles, and I have no intention of being counted among the losses." The Decepticons' withdrawal, whatever its cynical calculation, shifted the battle's balance decisively. Freed from Megatron's opportunistic assault, Optimus turned his full attention back toward the collapsing Millennium ranks, and found, arriving at the battle center, that Alucard had already delivered his verdict on the captain. The massive vampire lay broken amid the dockyard's ruins, his regeneration finally, definitively outpaced by the sheer accumulated violence Alucard had unleashed upon him. Not dead, not truly, but reduced to something considerably less than the terror that had entered the battle's scant minutes before. "You fought well," Alucard said, standing over his fallen opponent with something almost like respect coloring his terrible amusement. 60 years of preparation, and you very nearly gave me an interesting evening. That is more than most manage. He turned from the captain's broken form toward Optimus Prime, crimson eyes tracking the Autobot leader with renewed, undisguised interest. And you, Star Soldier, you held your ground against the Decepticons' betrayal without breaking. I confess, I have revised my opinion of your kind rather significantly since our first meeting in that archive. Is that your verdict, then? Optimus asked. The judgment you and Father Anderson have both been weighing since our arrival. Alucard's grin sharpened, though something in it carried, for the first time, genuine and unguarded acknowledgement rather than mere predatory amusement. My verdict, Optimus Prime, is that you are the strangest thing to enter this city in 400 years, and the only one I have met in all that time who fought a war this brutal without once losing whatever passes, in your kind, for a soul. He tipped his hat, mocking and sincere in equal measure. Come, I suspect your Sir Integra will want to know the battle is not yet finished. Only its most dangerous piece has been removed from the board. The Major still commands an army, and I imagine he will not take kindly to losing his prized soldier so decisively. Across the dockyard, the Major's broadcast crackled back to life one final time, his earlier delight curdling into something considerably colder as he watched, through whatever surveillance had survived the battle's chaos, his champion's defeat and his Decepticon allies' cynical withdrawal. Well, the Major's voice rolled out across the ruined battlefield, stripped now of its earlier theatrical glee. It appears tonight's opera requires a rather different final act than I had planned. No matter. I have waited 60 years for this war, ladies and gentlemen. I find I am not yet ready to let one lost champion end it. Behind that broadcast, in the vault's deepest chamber, the Major's true reserves, the vast majority of his manufactured army, held back from the initial engagement as a final, catastrophic contingency, began at last to stir. London no longer resembled the city that had welcomed dawn only days before. Smoke drifted through shattered streets, where ancient cathedrals stood beside buildings scarred by Cybertronian plasma fire. Entire districts lay without electricity, illuminated only by burning wreckage, and the intermittent flashes of supernatural combat fading into silence. The Thames carried fragments of twisted Cybertronian alloy alongside the ashes of Millennium's defeated forces, as though two entirely different wars had dissolved into the same river. For the first time since the dimensional rift had opened, there was quiet. It was an uneasy quiet. Optimus Prime stood upon the remains of Westminster Bridge, his battered armor reflecting the orange glow of distant fires. Every diagnostic warning across his systems demanded immediate repairs. Entire armor sections had been torn away. His left arm functioned at barely half capacity, and energon leaked steadily from fractures running across his chest plating. Yet he remained standing. Across the ruined skyline, surviving Autobots searched methodically for civilians trapped beneath collapsed buildings. Bumblebee transformed repeatedly between vehicle and robot mode, transporting the injured toward temporary evacuation centers established jointly by Hellsing personnel and British emergency responders. Ironhide lifted concrete slabs that no human machine could move. Ratchet treated wounded humans with medical technology centuries beyond Earth's understanding, carefully adapting every procedure to avoid overwhelming fragile human biology. None of them had been ordered. They simply understood. This world had suffered because of a war that was never meant to reach it. The least they could do was help rebuild it. Within Hellsing Manor, the atmosphere felt equally unfamiliar. The Emergency Operations Center, once consumed by frantic reports and impossible decisions, had fallen into an exhausted silence. Integra Hellsing stood before the great window overlooking London. She had spent her life preparing for catastrophe. She had anticipated Millennium's invasion. She had anticipated Iscariot's interference. She had even accepted that Alucard would one day unleash horrors beyond imagination if England demanded it. She had never anticipated an army from another universe. Walter quietly approached behind her. The latest casualty reports, Sir Integra. She accepted the folder without speaking. civilian losses, infrastructure destroyed, military casualties, Hellsing operatives killed during the fighting. The numbers hurt, not because they surprised her, because every one of them represented someone she had failed to protect. After several long moments, Walter finally broke the silence. "Do you regret trusting them?" Integra continued watching Optimus Prime through the damaged windows. Far below, the Autobot commander was helping rescue workers stabilize a collapsed railway tunnel. "No," she answered. Walter raised an eyebrow. "They had every opportunity to abandon us," Integra continued. "They stayed. They could have claimed this world while both Millennium and Iscariot were weakened. They refused. They fought because innocent people were dying." She closed the report. "I've spent my life judging monsters." Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Today, I discovered that not everything terrifying is monstrous." Elsewhere, Father Anderson surveyed the battlefield alongside the remaining Iscariot forces. Dozens of priests worked among the wounded without regard for allegiance. Autobots, British soldiers, Hellsing personnel, even captured Millennium survivors received treatment before imprisonment. One young priest approached cautiously. "Father, were they demons?" Anderson watched Bumblebee carefully lifting a frightened child from a collapsed apartment building. The little girl wrapped her arms around the giant machine's finger as though it were perfectly natural. The enormous Autobot remained completely motionless until she felt safe enough to smile. Only then did he carefully lower her into her mother's embrace. Anderson looked away. "No." The answer surprised even him. "They're soldiers." The priest frowned. "But they aren't human." "Aye. And neither is Alucard." The young man waited. "And yet," Anderson sighed, "I've seen plenty of humans commit greater evil than either." He rested one blessed bayonet across his shoulder. "The Lord judges souls. Perhaps steel can have one too." Deep beneath the city, where shadows still clung stubbornly to ancient stone, Alucard wandered alone. The battlefield no longer interested him. The slaughter had ended. Only consequences remained. He eventually found Optimus Prime standing alone beside the river. The Autobot sensed him immediately, but made no move toward his weapons. "You've come to finish our conversation." Alucard smiled. "No, I've come to admit something I rarely admit." Optimus turned. "I was wrong." Silence settled between them. "When I first saw you," Alucard continued, "I thought you were merely another machine pretending to understand war." His crimson eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "But you've watched your soldiers bleed. You've buried friends. You've carried responsibility that should have crushed you centuries ago." His grin returned. "You understand." Optimus looked across London's scarred skyline. "Understanding war is not the same as accepting it." "No, it never is." Alucard laughed quietly. "I've spent centuries searching for worthy opponents. I expected to find one. Instead, he looked directly into the Autobot leader's optics. I found someone I could respect." Optimus inclined his head. "The feeling is mutual." For a long moment, neither ancient warrior spoke. No threats, no challenges, only mutual recognition between two beings who had survived far longer than either had wished. Finally, Alucard broke the silence. "Will you leave? If we can reopen the dimensional bridge. And if you cannot." Optimus watched the sunrise beginning to break through London smoke. "Then Cybertron's war ends here." Those words lingered in the morning air. Even Alucard could hear the truth behind them. For the first time in millions of years, Optimus Prime sounded tired of fighting. The possibility of returning home occupied every surviving Autobot's thoughts, but none voiced it aloud. Ratchet's analysis of the dimensional fracture painted a bleak picture. The unstable energies that had torn open reality had collapsed during the battle. Recreating the phenomenon would require power beyond anything remaining in their damaged reserves. For now, Cybertron remained impossibly distant. Optimus gathered the Autobots near the river as the first rays of sunlight pierced London's lingering haze. "We have a choice," he said. "We may devote every remaining resource to finding a path home, or we may first help repair the damage our war brought upon this world." No one interrupted. Ironhide folded his massive arms. I've fought beside you long enough to know you've already made your decision. A faint smile crossed Optimus's face. I have. Bumblebee gave a cheerful burst of radio static, earning tired laughter from several of his comrades. Ratchet nodded. Then let's finish what we started. For weeks afterward, the Autobots became an unexpected sight across London. Tower cranes stood idle, while Cybertronian strength cleared collapsed buildings in hours instead of months. Damaged bridges were reinforced with salvaged alloy. Hospitals received emergency generators adapted from Autobot power systems. The British government officially denied every eyewitness report. The public quietly ignored those denials. Children left hand-painted signs reading, "Thank you," giant robots near reconstruction sites. Flowers appeared beside the wreckage, where Autobots had fallen during the conflict. Stories spread of impossible heroes who asked for nothing in return. Integra watched it all with measured caution. Trust was never something she gave freely. Yet each passing day made suspicion harder to justify. Far beneath Hellsing Manor, Alucard remained strangely absent from his usual games. Sarah's eventually found him sitting in darkness, staring toward the sealed chamber that contained remnants of Millennium's failed ambitions. "You've been quiet," she observed. "I've been thinking." She blinked. "That's unusual." He chuckled. "Do not grow accustomed to it." After a pause he asked, "Tell me, police girl, what makes a monster?" She hesitated, choosing to become one. "And if someone is feared simply because they're powerful, that's different." "Why?" "Because power isn't evil. It's what you decide to do with it." Alucard considered her answer for several moments. "I spent centuries believing strength existed only to dominate. And now, I've met a machine that carries enough strength to rule worlds." He smiled faintly. "And all it wishes to build is peace." Across the city, another conversation unfolded. Megatron stood imprisoned inside an immense containment chamber jointly engineered by Hellsing scientists and Autobot engineers. Specialized electromagnetic restraints locked his damaged body in place. Optimus entered alone. Megatron laughed despite his condition. "So, the victor comes." "I came to speak." "Then speak." Optimus regarded his oldest enemy with quiet sadness. "Our war is over." Megatron's expression hardened. "No, it simply pauses. It can end. It never ends." "For millions of years," Optimus replied, "we have destroyed everything we claim to love. We lost Cybertron. We lost our people. We nearly destroyed another world. What remains to conquer?" Megatron remained silent. Optimus stepped closer. "I once believed defeating you would save our race. I was wrong. What saves a civilization is not victory. It is choosing to stop." For the first time in countless centuries, Megatron had no answer. He watched his rival leave without another word. The silence that followed weighed more heavily than any prison wall. Several months later, Ratchet's calculations finally yielded hope. Using fragments of the collapsed dimensional bridge and carefully stabilized supernatural energy collected with Hellsing's assistance, a temporary portal became theoretically possible. Only one crossing, only one chance. The news spread quickly through both Autobots and Hellsing personnel. The farewell was held where everything had begun, along the banks of the Thames. Engineers worked silently, while blue energy gathered into a widening circle, suspended above the river. Integra approached Optimus. "It appears you found your road home." "So it seems." She extended her hand. "You've changed this world. I hope for the better." "I believe you have." The enormous Cybertronian carefully shook her hand, treating the gesture with remarkable delicacy. "You reminded me," Integra said quietly, "that leadership isn't measured by power. It's measured by responsibility." Optimus inclined his head. "And you reminded me that courage often comes in ordinary forms." Nearby, Anderson watched with folded arms. "I still don't trust machines." Walter smiled politely. "I don't believe they asked you to." Even Anderson laughed. One by one, the Autobots crossed the portal. Ironhide saluted the Hellsing soldiers who had fought beside him. Ratchet thanked the doctors who had helped adapt Cybertronian medicine for human use. Bumblebee paused longest. The same little girl he had rescued during the battle handed him a small drawing. It showed Autobots and humans standing together beneath a bright blue sky. He carefully stored it inside his chest compartment. Some treasures required no energon. Finally, only Optimus remained. Alucard appeared beside the portal without warning. "I wondered if you'd leave without saying goodbye." "I wouldn't." The vampire extended his gloved hand. In the weeks that followed, London slowly reclaimed its rhythm. The broken glass disappeared from its streets. Bridges reopened. Church bells rang once more above neighborhoods that had witnessed impossible things. Official reports spoke of industrial explosions, coordinated terrorist attacks, and classified military operations. Newspapers speculated. Politicians denied. Experts argued. Those who had stood beneath the shadow of towering Cybertronians and watched vampires tear through the night knew the truth. Some truths simply refused to fit inside official records. Deep within Hellsing Manor, Sir Integra Hellsing locked away the final files regarding the incident. Every photograph, battlefield report, fragment of Cybertronian alloy, and recovered transmission was sealed behind vault doors that few would ever see. Walter quietly observed as she placed the last document into its archive. "You believe someone will eventually need these records." Integra closed the steel cabinet. "I hope no one ever does." Walter nodded. "The best victories," he said, "are the ones history never realizes happened." Integra allowed herself the smallest smile. "For once, Walter, I agree." Elsewhere, Alucard stood alone upon the roof of Hellsing Manor. The night air carried the familiar scent of rain. London looked ordinary again. He found that strangely disappointing. For centuries, he had believed humanity fascinated him only when it embraced darkness. Wars, empires, monsters, fanatics. Those were the stories worth watching. Then strangers had fallen from another universe. Machines built solely for war had chosen compassion over conquest. The irony amused him. He laughed quietly into the night. "So," he whispered to no one in particular, "perhaps eternity still has a few surprises left." For an ancient monster, that realization was worth more than victory. Father Anderson never spoke publicly about the machines. His reports to Iscariot remained practical, direct, and frustratingly incomplete. When younger priests questioned him years later, asking whether the giant warriors had been demons, angels, or something in between, Anderson always answered the same way. They fought. They bled. They sacrificed themselves for people they'd never met. If that isn't enough for the Lord to judge them fairly, it's certainly enough for me. It was the closest he ever came to praise. Far beyond Earth's skies, where no telescope could follow, fragments of Cybertron slowly stirred with renewed purpose. The surviving Autobots rebuilt more than shattered cities. They rebuilt trust. Old divisions did not disappear overnight. Some former Decepticons refused peace. Others laid down their weapons, exhausted by a conflict that had consumed generations beyond counting. Optimus Prime never declared victory. Instead, he declared something far more difficult. The war was finished because someone had finally chosen not to continue it. Many questioned that decision. Some called it weakness. Others called it impossible. History eventually called it wisdom. Megatron remained a figure of debate rather than certainty. Some claimed he vanished into the unexplored reaches of space. Others insisted he devoted himself to rebuilding what his ambition had destroyed. Perhaps both stories contained pieces of the truth. Even legends deserve the opportunity to change. Whether redemption truly found him remained known only to the stars. Bumblebee kept one possession more carefully than any weapon. Hidden inside a secure compartment rested a child's drawing made with ordinary crayons. Two smiling humans stood beside towering robots beneath a bright blue sky. No battlefield strategy, no military insignia, no monuments, only friendship. Whenever younger Autobots questioned why Earth had mattered so much, Bumblebee silently displayed the drawing. No explanation was necessary. Ratchet preserved medical records gathered during their unexpected stay. Human medicine had taught him humility. Cybertronian science had not possessed every answer. Likewise, humanity had discovered that courage often compensated for technological limitations. Knowledge had flowed in both directions. Progress rarely belonged to only one civilization. Ironhide occasionally joked that humans were impossibly fragile. He always added the same observation immediately afterward. They're also impossibly stubborn. He meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. Generations passed. Buildings were rebuilt. Memorials weathered beneath London's endless rain. Children became grandparents. Witnesses became storytellers. Stories became myths. Eventually, someone would point toward unusually large tire tracks near the Thames after a heavy storm. Others would dismiss them as construction equipment. An elderly witness would simply smile. Some legends did not require proof. Within the Hellsing archives rested one final document. It carried no military classification, no operational summary, only a handwritten note from Integra herself. It read, "Power reveals character more clearly than it creates it. We feared giants because they possessed strength beyond imagination. We respected them because they chose restraint instead. Should history ever ask what truly saved London, the answer will not be superior weapons or greater monsters. It will be those who remembered that protecting life is a greater victory than taking it." Walter never altered those words. Neither did anyone who succeeded Integra. Some records deserved preservation exactly as they were written. And somewhere beneath unfamiliar stars, Optimus Prime often looked toward the darkness between galaxies. He wondered whether another impossible bridge might someday connect distant worlds once again. Not for war, not for conquest, but for understanding. He remembered a city haunted by monsters who nevertheless fought to protect humanity. He remembered a vampire who found respect where he expected only prey. He remembered a commander whose resolve never bent despite overwhelming odds. Most of all, he remembered that hope had survived in a place where every logical calculation predicted despair. That lesson traveled farther than any spacecraft. It crossed dimensions. It crossed histories. It crossed the boundaries separating steel from flesh, science from the supernatural, and strangers from allies. Because in every universe, regardless of its laws or its legends, one truth remained constant. Strength earns fear. Compassion earns trust. Only sacrifice earns peace. Long after the fires faded and the ruins disappeared, those who had witnessed the impossible carried its memory forward, not as a tale of machines or vampires, nor as a story of worlds colliding, but as proof that even the oldest wars can end when someone chooses to protect rather than destroy. And somewhere beyond the reach of both Earth and Cybertron, beneath stars that belonged to neither universe alone, that choice echoed onward, quiet, enduring, and brighter than any weapon ever forged. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more epic, what-if adventures like this, consider supporting the channel by clicking the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description or the pinned comment. Every contribution, no matter the size, helps bring more stories like this to life, and your support truly means a lot. Thank you for being part of the journey. May the Force be with you. More stories await.